What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was the most powerful ninja alive but no one noticed until it was too late? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. The path to early independence for an orphan of Konoha is limited by the options available to learn. Not many were willing to accept the small blonde boy as an apprentice, so his fallback and only option was the way of the shinobi. It was a harder path than he'd thought at the time, but it was worth it in the end because he'd found precious people to care about and fight for. They were the ones that allowed him to fight with everything he had every time he left the village. The common villagers, while some still saw him as the demon and not the person that housed the creature. Still, during the course of his long life, he accomplished many things and had even been elevated to the rank of Hokage of his village. So why was he now confronting another impossible enemy, seeking power and instigating wars among the shinobi tribes? The enemy didn't care. They wanted more power. They wanted to rule the lands with an iron fist and terror. Calling upon the past cages of various nations, many abilities were absorbed from their supposedly unrecoverable corpses. The rule had been the one still alive at the end of it all, would be the one to triumph. Uzumaki Naruto, the Nanakage of Konoha, the seventh Kage after the fall of Jiraiya the Toad Sage, who was sixth Hokage after the Godem failed during one of her medical procedures. She had died from exposure to an unknown disease she'd been dealing with. The eighth or Hachikage had been Konohamaru, who died during the rise of yet another shinobi war. The Nanadem was pulled from his well-deserved retirement to oversee this new war. His orders came from various parts of the world, as he competed with his enemy in gathering the abilities of his Kage predecessors. The shinobi fought the war in the only way they knew how, from the shadows. Many were killed and just as many were saved by these shadows. The grave of the final Kage was where the enemy and the Nanadem had their last confrontation. The last ability was swallowed by Naruto, and with it the inactive seal on his stomach burned. The pattern that had been with him all his life, even after that blasted demonic fox had been fully absorbed and was still there as a reminder of his ostracism, his childhood pain, activated. Naruto gasped and tore at his shirt. He called on all the elements, opening the path of the sage, and that's when he saw many ethereal paths. Paths he could have taken, paths he didn't take, paths to future loves, paths to lost loves, and one single path that would destroy this world's enemy before it would be too late to correct the total destruction that his enemy had been planning. He smiled, despite the pain that he was feeling at the moment. "Yeah," he said with golden eyes looking into the insane ones of his foe. "I'll take that path and you'll never rise." He released the fires in the seal and his enemy screamed in defiance to that outcome. "It's too late," Naruto told them. "My precious people are calling for me to come home. You are finished." The cage surrounded his enemy and then slowly collapsed inward and dwindled to a bare spot before completely evaporating. It left behind a charred spot on the ground and nothing else. The Nanadem fell like a puppet without strings. There was no one there to bury him and his corpse became food for the beasts. The old burnt seal was good for one more thing though. All the techniques that this cage had learned during his lifetime were burned away too. His body was no good to those that seek ninja techniques from the dead. No hunter of any shinobi tribe could extract his skills. In a small single apartment in a not quite nice area of Konoha village, a small blonde boy tossed and turned in his sleep, as though a nightmare had just come upon him. He sat up and gasped for air. His hand rested on the blood seal that had been a part of him for as long as he could remember. He blinked and his eyes turned gold for a moment and then reverted to his normal sky blue. He then stood up and walked with stiff movements because his poor limbs had seized during the night. He searched his medicine box for muscle cream and relaxants in order to relieve the terrible pain he was in. Tears fell from his eyes as he looked out of the window and saw only 4 faces on the cage monument of his former village. It worked, he thought. I took the last path and best path for my people. I never knew why they insisted on putting our heads up there, he said to himself. He mixed a couple of herbs in hot water and drank them down before smearing the cream on his arms first and then his legs. Looks like I'm going to have to do some extreme stretching before going back to sleep. He finished his task and chose a towel that was due to be washed to use. He laid it out on the ground and proceeded to stretch his neck, arms and legs using a mixed method of yoga and tai chi. The towel helped keep the cream from becoming embedded into his floor. The mixed exercise was something that he discovered as he'd aged, and he needed it in order to keep limber, if he still wanted to do most of the things he'd been used to doing in his youth. Now it was only a matter of ensuring that his new and that much younger body, plus stiff muscles, were sufficiently warmed up to prevent a night of muscle cramps. He felt several joints pop, and then with one final stretch his back cracked in just the right places to render him boneless. Ah, he sighed in pleasure at sensation. Perfect, now to go back to sleep. Naruto climbed back into his bed, rolled into the blankets like a sausage, and slept so soundly that he actually missed class for the first time since he'd begun to attend the Ninja Academy at the age of 7. Students were permitted to miss a few classes based on injuries, but this was the first time that he'd missed because he was too tired to go. He actually slept for 24 full hours and didn't realize that he'd missed the Genin exam. It was the first one he'd applied to, and unfortunately, he was going to have to wait 6 months to try again. The students at the Ninja Academy could try to become genin at the age of 10 up until they turned 13 years old, which was the age of most civilian apprenticeships. The academy held exams for genin every 6 months, depending on the number of students attempting the exam. Well, isn't this an interesting development? The old fox demon said, looking down at the figure in front of him that kept shifting from boy, to teenager, and to an aged gray-haired, old man. I don't really understand what happened, Naruto said to the sneering fox. He shrugged and said, oh well, it looks I'll get to live my life again. He made a few hand signs and the chakra belonging to the fox demon flowed into him. It was slow at first, but that was because the boy needed to make sure that the flow would work like he'd learned in his past life. What do you think you're doing? The fox snarled at him. He felt the loss of energy. He felt sluggish. It was almost like he'd been running through the forest for a very long time. I'm doing what needs to be done, Naruto said. The sealing technique was not meant to be used like this for so long. It's best that I fix this now while I still can, before something happens like someone trying to forcibly extract you. Like anything has that kind of power, the fox said. There are places of power in this world. If the right number of people with an ability to concentrate for extended periods of time and have large chakra capacities. If these were to gather, then all confined Biju can be forcibly removed from their human hosts. Naruto explained. Although that's not supposed to happen for a few more years, and I do plan to make it very difficult for them. How? The fox asked, but received no reply. That's when he noticed that the boy was no longer there. He lay down and curled his 8 tails around him. Gaki, I'll figure this out, and as soon as I know what it is, you're going to be in a world of hurt. Naruto had only rolled over in his sleep, deepening his breath and opening the coils of his chakra system to absorb the demonic chakra that he'd pulled from the fox. It was only one tail, but it was one that the fox didn't remember ever having, as that was the effect of absorption and the concentrated hand signals that the boy had just used. The alarm clock rang out through the small one-room apartment, getting louder as it was ignored. A hand emerged from the blanket roll on the small single bed, grabbed the offending item and flung it out of the window with such force that it severed an electrical line 4 buildings away. The line that fell almost shocked a passing ambu guard. Luckily it missed them, and the clock continued on its way to finally land in an abandoned bird's nest that had been formed on top of the chimney of a seemingly abandoned building, still ringing out its annoying tone. Naruto rolled over trying to get comfortable, but he'd had that nagging feeling that something was wrong. So he got up and tripped over the towel he'd used the night before last. The smell was powerful, but he only kicked it away, and it was then that he looked around to note where he was. He blinked and said out loud, "What the hell?" He paused to take in a deep breath and activated his eyes using an ancient forgotten ninja technique called Gyo, to see the hidden underneath. There was nothing to see. This technique was one that he'd learned much later in his old life. It had helped him in more ways than could be counted. Unfortunately, with nothing to see, as this was his second apartment, he couldn't detect a trace of how he'd gotten there or if this was just an elaborate genjutsu. The place was the one that he'd moved to after the Sandame found out about the rise in rent that he'd been subjected to in his previous building. This building was the property of a Junin that didn't mind him living there, but refused to fork over the money for repairs that the apartment needed. The boy had been given blanket permission to fix up whatever he wanted, but the Junin wasn't going to pay for it, and that had been written in the boy's lease agreement, which was a good thing too, cause he did a lot of things in there. Naruto noted everything in the room, including the calendar, but somehow he knew that the red, circled day had already passed. He was infinitely aware of time and he knew that he missed his chance at taking his first genin exam. At least he could still try again in 6 months. He dressed quickly, raced to the graduated class and was yelled at for not being there the day before to take the exam with the other prospective genins seated in the room. They stared at him. "I'm sorry," he said, clapping his hands together and bowing in pretend terror. He even shook his small frame for good measure. "I was ill and couldn't take the tests. I didn't want to fail for not paying attention and no one would have thanked me if I brought the flu to school." "Are you better now?" the sensei asked the small blonde boy, not really concerned about his health, but she had to maintain an air of concern. Plus this information had to be added to the boy's records anyway. "Yes, ma'am," Naruto said. "Can I still attend classes?" "You're going to be treated as though you failed," the woman told him. "You do have the option to go into a 6-month remedial class, instead of returning to your year mates." "I'd prefer that," Naruto said. His year mates had never been helpful and had only scorned him. He didn't want to continue with them since he knew that he couldn't face anyone he'd known, not just yet. The 6 months timeline with a new group would allow him the chance to push for another chance at an early graduation test. "Very well," the Chunin sensei replied. She handed him a note and told him, "Go to room 318 and give this to the sensei there to get admitted." "Thank you, sensei." He glanced at the note once he was completely out of the room with the door closed behind him. He snorted when he saw that it said, "He's your problem now." Still he ran up to the room, knocked on the door and entered when invited to do so. The Chunin in this room was Mizuki-sensei. Naruto's thoughts halted for a moment, but his features showed none of his concerns and only showed his earnestness at being in the class. "I'm Uzumaki Naruto," the young blonde said. "I failed the genin exam, but was told I could join your remedial class, instead of returning to those in my year." He walked over and handed the note to the white blonde-haired man. The traitor in league with Kirigakure looked at the boy as though to gauge his value within the class. Then the man shrugged, not caring about the boy or whether the kid would find it difficult in his class and said, "Go sit there." Naruto was directed to the second-to-last row and made to sit next to one of the Hyuga clan. That clan had people with very distinctive eyes that were either white, lavender, pale purple or very light blue with no pupils. "It's kind of creepy," he thought. He did a minor double take when he realized that the person next to him was the pissed-off Hyuga Neji. He'd fought a long time ago at his first Chunin exam. "Well hell," he thought. "This is going to be interesting, I think." His seatmate ignored him and that was fine by the blonde since he was only there to maintain his presence at the academy in order to pass the next genin exam and move up in the ranks of the shinobi field. He calculated everything that he needed to do in order to build up his physical strength and stamina. At least classes are only half days and the afternoon contains options or independent studies in other fields, he thought. Now what to do? "Everyone, we'll review all the theory behind the standard jutsus in order to pass the genin exams," Mizuki-sensei told them. "Naruto, how about you tell us when you'd use the Bushin jutsu?" "Any situation that I need to run from quickly," the blonde said. "I'd want a decoy for the enemy to follow, as long as they can be fooled by the copy." Mizuki hadn't expected that kind of answer, but it was correct. However, no one ever praised the demonic container and he wasn't about to begin either. "Very well," the man said. "Sit down. Yukina, when would you?" Naruto tuned out the rest of the questions and answers. These students didn't make notes in class because they were expected to memorize most of what was discussed. It was the shinobi way of information gathering, as not all information could be written. They were to create their notes at home and use them to study from in order to pass the written tests given. "Class dismissed for extra studies," Mizuki-sensei said. "Be here at 7 in the morning for the physical portion of classes, Naruto. You need to keep up with these students now." "Yes, sensei," the blonde said and left as quickly as he could. He had a few errands to run and most of them were just staking out empty buildings in order to be able to scrounge up items that could improve his living conditions just a bit or claim them as a training ground. The most important things he needed now though were good ink, paper and blank scrolls. He also needed to find that book again. It was a book that he'd found in the Hokage's tower, but it was in a concealed room gathering dust, even by the time he'd become the Hokage of Konoha. The book contained a strange ninja technique that he'd been close to mastering a part of it based on what it had been written about it. Most of the techniques in the book were chakra-based, but the concepts or ideas in it had been mind-blowing to him at the time. "I going need that book now," he thought. "It'll help with the absorption of the chakra and balance out my current knowledge. I might even be able to gain access to Hatsu this time around." "What are you talking about, Gaki?" the fox said in his mind. "What knowledge could you possibly have? Aren't you known at the dead last of your class?" "My classes have changed, Kurama," Naruto said, as he watched a familiar ninja wearing glasses leave in a seemingly abandoned building. "Holy shit, that's Kabuto's hideout. We never found that in the past." "Gaki," the fox yelled to get the attention of his host. "Watch your emotions or else the townspeople will be after you again." "Yeah, thanks," Naruto said, and then he stepped into a shadow and blinked. "What the hell? Since when have we been conversing like this, and why the hell would you care what the townspeople think?" "We don't talk all the time," the fox told him. "It certainly doesn't mean that I care, but you once likened it to some weird ninja term called frenemies. We usually only talk when your emotions are too much, even for me to handle, because the color of my chakra becomes slightly visible and you get physically attacked." Naruto thought, frenemies? He shook his head and immediately understood the idea or concept of it. They were enemies that acted friendly-like, but would never been real friends, as they both understood the meaning of the word. "Got it," he relied. "I can see that. So yeah, frenemies it is then. So tell this Yakko fox what's got your panties in a bunch so that I can laugh at you," Kurama said. Not today," Naruto said. "Later though, when we both need a laugh." The fox grumbled and then curled up to sleep, snoring in the boy's ear, knowing how to direct the sound to annoy the brat. The blonde was surprised at that, but then he'd also learned long ago to redirect inconsequential sounds elsewhere. He could do it by placing a Fujin seal somewhere in order to annoy another person, or he could redirect to some other part of his mind to just completely ignore. Naruto snickered softly and then ran to a second-hand shop of books that had always allowed him access to the ones they were shipping to a large store in a bigger town. If he wanted any of them, he was permitted to pay pittance for them, as most were ruined in some fashion or another. Exercise in chakra control should be learned at the academy, he thought as he tried to climb a tree while using every technique he could think of to remember the training he'd had in the past during his time as a genin traveling to the land of waves with Team 7. He was outside of the village in a park that was barely used at this time of day. Coming back in time was a good and bad idea, his thoughts continued, as he slipped down the bark of the tree again. Everything that I had ever learned needs to be relearned. Every exercise, everything that my body is used to knowing has to relearn it again before I can even think of accessing even the base jutsus I need to pass the genin exam. At least this time, I can plan ahead and I know how to do it. He gave up on tree climbing for now. 15 minutes later he huffed as he continued his run around the outside perimeter of the village. He'd gotten written permission from his sensei to do the run before coming to class, and the gate guards noted his times for him so that he could track his improvement in it. He'd done the calculations, and then with judicious use of chakra on his feet, he added a bounce to his running steps. He noted that the first day that his time was 2 hours and 43 minutes. He figured that learning to add chakra to his basic exercises would help to improve his needs, and eventually the tree climbing thing would come to him sooner than it had in the past. He calculated that he needed to shave it down to 1 hour and 45 minutes before he added any weights to build up the missing strength in his lower body. He did morning, afternoon and evening stretches with and without weights to improve the rotation of his limbs. He found that it did help, but he was looking forward to extracting that book from the Hokage's tower. First though, get the strength and flexibility to climb the tower and bypass the traps he knew about. Then practice chakra control until he could walk on anything. Finally, an intensive study of traps, regular hunting ones as well as all potential ninja ones from concealed seals, sutras or tripwires before even making a first attempt at getting into that old storage room. Naruto was sitting in an optional watercolor class that was offered for only 2 months. This had been after he'd taken a 3 months drawing class for fun. He'd always wanted to learn how to paint, using the techniques that Yuhi Kurenai was teaching it. The class wasn't a frequent one, but it did help him to calm his mind and his body to the point of meditating while painting. This was perhaps the only class that he ever received praise in, and that was because of his instinctive use of the colors. Kurenai's sensei had asked him if he'd be interested in a calligraphy class too, but the boy's answer surprised her. "Nah," he'd said, "I don't need that one. Why do you ask? I just thought that perhaps some poems in calligraphy or brushed kanji would improve your paintings so that people would be interested in purchasing them, she'd said. He snorted and replied, they'd never buy them if they knew that I was the one that made them. I see, she noted his expression and wondered just how much he knew about the circumstances surrounding his birth. I can make one just for you though, Naruto said. It'll be a present to you for the last day of this class. He paused, looked down, shuffled his feet and asked. That'd be okay, wouldn't it? That'd be perfectly fine, she answered. I'm going to look forward to it. The last class is at the end of this month. You got it, he answered brightly. When he left class after they were dismissed, he ran to the used bookstore to find a book on poems or maybe even one on how to write poems, just in case. There were a couple of books with good poems and there was one explaining different types of poetry. He thought about it and then thought about the painting he wanted to make for the sensei. Haiku, he'd read. A poem of 5 syllables in one line, 7 syllables in the second line and 5 in the last. No comparisons allowed and usually reflects moods. He nodded at the book and paid cheaply for 2 that contained poetry and the one that contained the how-to write poems. This should help with keeping my writing neat, he thought, as he remembered how his hands needed to be retrained to write beautifully. I'm going to need to make more paper to practice on. That had been one of the old abilities from one of the cages that he'd absorbed from his past life, during the final war he'd had to participate in. Papermaking was important for those with a knack for using the fuinjutsu techniques. Those that made their own paper could even infuse them with their chakra and level up the fuda, sutras, sigils or seals marked on them. The change in the activation level changed what could have been a small bang into a loud destructive explosion, again based on ability and chakra levels. Kurenai sensei dismissed this class for the last time. The last student out of the classroom had left behind a wrapped parcel on her desk. As promised, Naruto told her. I'll be going now. Wait, she said. I'll open it and let you know what I think. The blonde looked at the door as though he wanted to escape. He took a deep breath and then returned to sit at the desk in front of his professor. He waited for her to open up the package. She gasped and said, "This is beautiful. Where did you get this kind of paper?" "It was around," Naruto said, and he kind of shifted in seat, not wanting to let her that he'd made it. "Borrowed? No way," he replied and was about to run away. "All right then, I won't ask you how you acquired it," she said, which calmed him down somewhat. "You pass with high praise, and with this." She'd pre-prepared a note that had already been added to his ninja file. What she handed him was a copy of it. It's in the opinion of this sensei that Uzumaki Naruto has the ability to create art in a manner that is natural. His concentration on subject matter would improve if permitted to pursue training in this field. Strong recommendation of outside placement and training for this secondary skill set, which could be of use for undercover work. Wow, he said out loud. He'd never taken a course like this the first time around and had never seen this kind of recommendation ever in his own files. He'd seen it for a few others, but never in his. "Thanks," he said. "You're welcome," she told him. "Now you'd best get home. It looks like rain is coming tonight." She looked back at the watercolor painting. It was done in greens and yellows, only showing hints of leaf formations with the veins of darker color. Along one side of it were the following lines written in beautiful kanji script. "Leaves shining up there, tasting the sun and the rain. Grow to the sky, high." No wonder he didn't want to attend a calligraphy class, she thought. The interesting thing about the painting is that she could picture the leaves actually growing and moving in a soft, trying to reach that patch of blue color in the background. "Thank you for everything, sensei," he said again. "If you want to see something interesting, place a tiny bit of your personal chakra on the side of the painting at the mark you see." Then he'd run away quickly to go rescue his laundry that had been drying on the roof of his building. He'd claimed the roof for a few purposes and had checked with the landlord about it too. Since no one ever went up there, he was permitted to do what he wanted, as long as it didn't interfere with the tenant's cable or any other wiring to the building. She did as the boy had told her and was astounded when she heard the wind blowing through the leaves of the watercolor trees. The movement she'd sworn she'd seen was more visible now that the painting had received a boost of energy. The addition of the chakra ensured that the hidden Fujin seal would activate the painting's unique ability every time she walked by it. "Amazing, that kid," she said to no one. She packaged the painting and took it home. There was no signature on the front of it either, but that was something of a habit with the boy from what she'd noted about his other paintings. He did add his mark on the back of them, so she turned it around and noted his preferred mark was there, along with a small foxtail to end it. Does he know? She wondered and then put that thought away quickly. It won't matter if he does or doesn't, the kid will have a harder time in this village because of what he holds inside him. Naruto had been lucky so far, to not run into any one of his old or past classmates during his self-improved training. He'd made his new choices when he found himself back in the past in his 10-year-old body. The classes he was in didn't include his old gang because he'd chosen to find a way to gain the status of genin before his second or third terrible failure. I wonder if Mizuki-sensei will find a way to approach me to get that scroll from the Hokage's office or not this time around, he thought, after finishing another boring class. He looked around to see if there were any students in there that he could spar with, but instead left to go do some more self-training outside of the village. It's the weekend, so, yeah, survival training it is. He returned to his apartment and packed up things that he considered essential inside 3 waterproof scrolls. He added a generic map in order to practice his mapping skills. There were specific paths and sections outside of Konoha that could be used for independent training, and any academy student could leave for a few days, if they had permission from their parents or guardians. Naruto was an orphan, so his options were different. He could leave the village as long as he stated the general area that he was going to, and then he'd be handed a map of areas to avoid. These areas were usually booked for training by other people, or sometimes the Chunin would point out the areas that he'd be permitted to visit and he could state the path that he'd take to go to all of them. That is if he wanted to go to all of them. This area, he pointed. It was a forested area with large trees, several streams, but was located on a plateau area on the mountain range behind the cage monument of the village. The Chunin guards made notes and then asked, "How long will you be gone?" "I expect to be back late morning or early afternoon of Sunday," Naruto told them. They added the time frame, had him sign for confirmation of his plans, and then waved him through the doors. Naruto ran to the location of his choice. At the rock face he prepared several kunai knives, tying them with rock climbing rope. He used them like the mountain climbers used anchor pitons. He used his familiar ninja knives and infused them with chakra to make them do the work like pitons do for regular climbers. In the past he'd done this several times and he'd found that it helped him to use the common ninja tools and chakra, as it increased his skills in using those. Not only that, but finding different ways to use the tools improved his understanding of their limits and their strengths. It wasn't every day that an enemy was confronted or taken down because the kunai that hit them had a rope attached with a chakra summon that force dragged them through the underbrush. If done correctly, the kunai could even have a Fujin seal on it in order to prevent the enemy from performing any type of henge that would allow him to escape from that situation. Naruto giggled during his climb as he recalled a time when he dragged an enemy through a very rural field filled with cow dung. The enemy had even slammed up against roots and boulders that had been embedded in the fields and were impossible for the average farmer to remove. He reached the plateau and was pleased to note that he had everything he needed there in order to practice his jutsus. He had notes on several forms of martial arts that he'd made over the time at night when it was quiet and he was supposed to making class notes to study from. It had taken him about 3 months to write down the styles that he'd used and the exercises needed to ensure smooth executions of those techniques. All that writing had also improved his writing skills to form better characters. He'd practiced that with both hands because you never knew when one hand or arm would be out of commission for long periods of time. This survival training for the next 3 days and 2 nights were to build up his strength and chakra control. He even planned to absorb another tail from the demon beast within him. That would have to wait until he was physically exhausted because this time the tail he was aiming for was the one that would help him incorporate his past physical knowledge into his present tiny form. Hopefully it would help him to transition faster into the fighter he used to be. The fox was not going to be pleased. Mizuki-sensei was confused about the young blonde Jinchuriki. The boy had shown a noted improvement over his previous years in attendance at the ninja academy. He handed his request to take the genin exam along with the others in his current class of mixed 11 and mostly 12-year-olds, at the 6-month mark. The Chunin couldn't deny the boy his second chance. The tests were similar to the one the boy had missed, so there was nothing to stop Naruto from taking it now. Classes were loosely taught, as the students needed to experience self-instruction after so many years. How far they went after being approved for genin levels was mainly based on what their Junin sensei taught them and how they meshed together as a cohesive working ninja cell. At least the kid is only 1 or 2 years younger than the rest, Mizuki-sensei thought. It would have been harder for the boy if he'd passed with those students who were 2 or 3 years older than he was. All the current students had just passed the written portion of their genin test, and now all that remained was to test how well they'd learned their jutsus. The written test contained questions mainly based on the jutsus that they were about to be physically tested on. The base 3 were Bushin no Jutsu, Kawarimi no Jutsu, and Henge no Jutsu. The general Bushin type is just a plain clone technique. It creates a clone that is good for attacking or confusing the enemy, but has no substance and will dissipate when hit. Kawarimi is the body replacement technique, which creates an optical illusion when the original ninja is replaced by a block of wood or some other object. Last is the henge technique, to change oneself into something else that is not a clone, but fully a copy of the person, animal or object. Since the line of students called forth was in alphabetical order, Naruto had time to think about how to perform this part of the exam and hopefully pass. He watched as most of the students hanged into their sensei, which to him wouldn't have been so bad if his teacher had been Iruka-sensei. However, since it was Mizuki-sensei, he just wanted to vomit at the thought. He looked around the room to get an idea what to henge into. They only needed to pass at one of the 3 techniques, but because of his age he was told that he'd need to pass all 3 of them to graduate. It was also to punish him for the fact that he'd not shown up to take the previous exam. I bet it's also because he wants free reign to attack me using the Kawarimi technique, he thought. He got ready as his sensei pulled out one kunai, but the young blonde knew that the palm could hide more weapons, like a shuriken or 2 senbon needles or any combination of thrown weapons. Ready? Mizuki-sensei asked and lifted the kunai in an exaggerated form of readiness. Naruto nodded. The knife was tossed, but 2 seconds behind that came 3 shuriken and 5 senbon needles. The blonde watched their approach. He needed to hold his form and then release. He'd replaced his body with a random desk in the room, but more than that, he'd stood the desk up on its shortest end, almost to form a shield. He then kawarimi'd back to his testing position and put the desk back in its proper place with the thrown weapons still sticking out of it. The other students were shocked at the number of weapons, and then they looked at their teacher, who only shrugged and said, "Next, do 3 Bushin." Naruto created 3 clones that looked exactly like him. His teacher walked around each and nodded that they were fine. Final jutsu, he told the blonde. "Do not henge into me." "Okay," Naruto said. "Do you want me to hide too?" "Actually, that's not a bad idea," Mizuki-sensei said. "Let's see how creative you are. If I or any of the students here can't find you under 5 minutes, you'll graduate." Naruto nodded and formed the hand seals to poof away. There was only one option to become in this case. The Hyuga of the class would have been able to detect him if he'd chosen something somewhere else in the room. Therefore he switched with the hair tie on Hyuga Neji and hid the original tie in the boy's desk. Mizuki-sensei waited 2 minutes before nodding at the Hyuga. Neji activated his Byakugan ability. The boy took his time and looked around the entire class. He could not discover where or what the blonde had changed into. None of the students knew how to detect chakra signatures, and the Chunin sensei was apparently not one of the ones skilled in detecting it either. "He's not here," Neji said with wide-eyed surprise. "I can't find him." "Anyone else?" Mizuki-sensei asked and thought. That was the longest 5 minutes ever. The negative response prompted him to say, "All right, come out, Naruto." Naruto popped back up at the front of the class at the same time returning Neji's hair tie back in place so that the Hyuga could not detect the change. The blonde asked, "So, I pass?" "You pass," Mizuki-sensei said and handed him the headband of a genin-ranked ninja of Konoha village. "Congratulations, graduates. Notice of your pass will be submitted for review for cell placement. Come in tomorrow at your regular times to find out who will be part of your 4-man cell." Most of the students were leaving, but a few remained behind to hear the answer to their sensei's question. "Naruto," the man said, calling forth the new genin. "What did you henge into?" Naruto grinned and said, "Neji's hair tie." "What?" Neji said loudly. "I switched out with your original hair tie and put that in your desk. Then I changed into your hair tie, so you couldn't detect my chakra with your Byakugan technique," Naruto said again with a grin. "I had to, or else you'd have found me easily. Since your hair tie is behind you, you wouldn't think to look there, even if you turned around to look at the back of the class." Neji frowned and said, "Now that I know." Yeah, Naruto nodded. Now that you know, you'll have to figure out a way to detect that kind of thing. Neji huffed and left the room. The other students had snickered at the answer because honestly that was the most logical place to hide a hench from someone that could detect it, like many of the Hyuga in the village. Too bad there weren't two Hyugas in this class, one student said to their friend. The second one would have probably found Naruto. True, the friend replied. So, how do you think you'd hide from two people who could read chakra signatures like that? I don't know, the voices faded as they left the building. Mizuki-sensei made his notes on who passed and why. He may be a traitor spy from Kirigakure, but he was also currently masquerading as a Chunin-level teacher in Konoha. The blonde had passed honestly and had used his mind to do it. The notes he made were about placement recommendations for specific types of cells that the genins would likely do well on. Naruto, however, was a wild card. The teacher strongly suspected that the boy would do well on any team because the boy was so open to trying to fit in. A generalized cell, he thought, and made the notation. Also, he'd do well with an undercover or other specialization. He didn't have to specify what specialization meant. The placement board and Hokage would know it meant one of several options, like infiltration, spy, or even assassin. The next day the team placements were handed out. Naruto found himself on Team 11 with two older girls. It was an odd combination. He'd observed and knew from his past that most genin cells would only have one girl on it because there was a distinctive lack of female interest in the shinobi arts. Their Junin sensei was actually a Hyuga, too. The irony was not lost on the three students. Hyuga Tokuma, I was surprised to find out that he had the container of the demon fox on his team. The reason had been explained to him by the council. Your Byakugan technique is to be used as an early alert, the council had said. If Kyuubi no Yoko emerges or influences the boy in any way, you'll be able to see it well in advance and take action. I understand, Tokuma said. Do you have any objection to having Naruto on your team? The Hokage asked. The Hyuga Junin blinked, shook his head and said, no objections. I understand that I will be required to keep an eye on him for the duration that they are a genin cell, but that is only providing they pass the unknown secondary genin test. Tokuma walked to the class where his three genin were waiting for him. There seemed to be plenty of laughter as girlish giggling had him wincing because he now realized that the majority of his genin were girls. He thought, I'm going to have to change their focus from boys to being ninja. This is not going to be fun. He needn't have worried because in the room the two girls were, Haruno Akiko, 12, a third cousin to Haruno Sakura from the first-year class that Naruto refused to attend after missing his first genin exam. The second girl was Inuzuka Riza, 11, a fourth child of a cousin of the Inuzuka clan's leader. The Inuzuka girl didn't have a dog with her, but she told her new teammates that it was because none were compatible with her yet. It happens, Riza said with a shrug. Not all Inuzukas need a nin dog. My parents suspect that I might find one later to bond with. Akiko looked at the blonde boy and asked, so how come I hear people calling you dead last and Dobi in the training yards? Well, Naruto said, rubbing the back of his head. I didn't do well in schoolwork and my jutsu results were silly when I started doing them. Even the one I invented made them laugh, but it needs some work and all of the girls just didn't like it. Why not? Akiko asked with growing suspicion. I call it my Waijutsu, Naruto mumbled. Show us, Riza said. I don't want to offend you, the blonde 10-year-old boy said, having learnt that girls hit what they don't like. Although he suspected that it had been because they were silently encouraged by some of the teachers and parents around them to act out against him. Let's see it, Akiko said. All right, you asked for it, the boy sighed and poof. In front of the two girls was a semi-adult buxom teen-looking girl with long pigtails, pouty lips and long lashes. What do you think? The girl said, hiding a twitter behind her hand. His two teammates were notably shocked and then gained a calculating expression. Interesting, Akiko said. Need some work, you say? Well, yeah, he said, popping back into his regular, 10-year-old body. I'm not a girl, so I don't know a lot of things. I know from magazines and such what kind things would make guys act stupid based on the looks they have on their faces when they see the magazines, but that doesn't mean I can fool anyone. You'd need to cover your whisker marks, Riza said. Not with makeup but with another condition added to your jutsu. I'm curious, Akiko said. If we were to do the Waijutsu, would we be girls or boys? Boys, Naruto answered immediately. What? The two girls shrieked. Why? It's a gender switch with a mix of all three base academy jutsus, Naruto said. I can't quite explain how it works, I just know that when I thought about the jutsus that were taught, that we could combine them to work that way. What made you think of it? Riza asked. I wanted the option to hide in plain sight, Naruto said. I was thinking of being a shinobi in a foreign country and suddenly needing to hide. I thought that if the enemy knew to look for a male operative then I'd switch to look different, but it's still a matter of getting the clothing to change and convincing them that I'm really an innocent girl. Akiko thought about that and then thought about being stuck somewhere dangerous where the enemy was looking for a girl. She shuddered and said, I wouldn't want to be caught as a girl. Neither would I, Riza replied. I wouldn't want to be caught as either at this age, Naruto said. Perverts exist everywhere you know. No wonder Sakura screams about this jutsu of yours. Akiko started to laugh. Riza caught on, giggled and finished saying, the girls think you're only a pervert. Naruto groaned dramatically and hid his head in the crook of his arms. He was turning red from embarrassment. It was my first invented jutsu, he thought. It's still embarrassing to have them point out that the girls in my original life only thought of me as a pervert and not how that jutsu could be used in an emergency situation. He glanced at his new teammates and thought, I wonder if they'd be willing to help me to improve it? Their Junin sensei made his appearance at the tail end of the conversation and noted that the girls were laughing at the embarrassed expression of the orange jumpsuit wearing youngest member of their team. Hello Team 11, he said. I'm your Junin teacher and you can call me Tokuma sensei. There are too many with the last name Hyuga running around this village. Follow me to the training grounds that I booked for our group. He left the room and the three new genin followed him. At training ground 23 they gathered around him and introduced themselves when their sensei asked, all right. How about you give your names and tell me a bit about your likes, dislikes and dreams for the future. I'm Haruno Akiko and am 12 years old, the dark red-haired girl said. I like hot pot, flower arranging and new clothes. I dislike Sakura because she's too book smart and doesn't take the kunoichi lessons seriously anymore. In the future I want to be able to make specialty clothing for the ninja of this village. That's an awesome idea, Naruto said with a genuine smile. Riza looked at her with excitement. I agree. My name is Inuzuka Riza and I'm 11 going on 12 in 2 months. I don't have a nin dog partner yet, but I think that's because I haven't chosen a direction for my future. They don't like it if you're undecided. I like dogs, cats and some birds. I don't like frogs or snakes because they're slimy. I like the martial arts and any ninjutsu that could be added to make the strike stronger. I hope that one day I could open a dojo or an exercise studio, something of that nature for girls only. That way they'd be able to come there and practice freely without having boys around. That's an awesome idea too, Naruto told her. I can totally see that. Girls need a separate place to not be stared at and to not stare at the boys, if they're actually serious about becoming ninjas. What about you? Tokuma said to Naruto. What about me? The blonde looked at them confused. Likes, Riza said. Dislikes, Akiko said. Tokuma finished with, dreams of the future. Oops, Naruto said and rubbed the back of his neck. My name is Uzumaki Naruto and I'm 10. I like ramen because it's the one food that doesn't spoil fast. I like thinking up new jutsu, even though they don't work too well. The girls giggled at this, recalling their brief conversation. I don't like the meat available at the market because it spoils too fast and I don't really like the color orange. He fingered his jumpsuit thoughtfully. He brightened up suddenly and seriously told his new team. One day in the future, I'm going to be the Hokage of this village. Tokuma blinked. This had been said with such certainty and for some reason even the girls believed that it could happen. I see, the Junin said. Well, tomorrow this is where we shall meet in the morning. Be here for 6 am and don't be late. Yes sensei, the 3 genin told him. They dispersed to their separate homes, except for Naruto. Tonight was the night he needed to search the Hokage's locked storeroom because he'd be too busy with the various D-rank missions and his new team to go there later. In the night, hidden behind the full, dark, moon, no shadow could form. Only those with the ability to see in the dark could move with certainty. The Anbu guards patrolled a little more frequently, on nights like this one, to ensure that the village remained at peace. A single kunai chinked in the mortar between 2 bricks on the Hokage tower. The noise wasn't repeated often and it sounded in conjunction to the normal sounds that the patrolling ninjas were used to hearing in the night. Therefore it was completely ignored. A Fujin sigil for silence was inscribed on the soles of the shoes and the gloves of the intruder. This person was small, dressed in a very dark matte gray skin-tight bodysuit with a hood that hid his hair. This person only wore a belt with a single pouch located at his lower back. The lenses of his multi-lens goggles revealed all the traps, as they were all chakra-based and easily seen. What was seen was bypassed quickly, silently, and no attention was turned to the slim tower opening, which wasn't ideal for crawling into, unless you were of a stature and height small enough to slip in. It's a good thing that I'm doing this now before I gain some weight and height, Naruto thought as he stepped over a tripwire trap. There's no way that I'd have had the patience to wait until I'm named Hokage to get that book. He looked around the room from the ledge and it was pretty much in the same condition as when he'd been named the Nanadem of Konoha. He flicked through the series of lenses on his goggles, ensuring that there were no other types of traps to be seen. He expanded his senses and then made his way into the book stacks by clinging to the shelves, knowing that there were pressure traps in the floor in the regular aisles, but not on the sections of the floor holding the shelving full of books, records and several old weapons. He came for one book, but found two more and one scroll of interesting information. He knew that he could take more than that with him, but it wasn't needed. 15 minutes of sifting through the old boxes and he finally found the actual book he'd been seeking. He added that to his storage scroll which contained the other items and soon it tucked it away in the pouch at his back. 10 minutes of retracing his steps and ensuring that there was no trace of his actions in the room. He hopped onto the ledge only after the patrolling Anbu guard had finished his pass. He faced the room, pulled out a small canister of spray and sprayed dust into the room. The dust was similar to what he'd waded through, but in this case it was the kind that erased his chakra, heat signature, foot and fingerprints, should any have been left behind by accident. Another 15 minutes later, he'd arrived at his apartment. No point in rushing, he thought. That had been a lesson well learned. I'm curious about that, the fox said to him. What happened that made you learn that particular lesson? It was a foolish thing with Jiraiya-sensei, Naruto said, as he stripped his dark gear and hid it under his bed. He took out the storage scroll and extracted the books and information scroll on the subject of ninjutsu. The idiot had me use my waijutsu to go into a brothel to pick up the information that his contact had left for him. When I left the place, I left a little too quickly and 3 men who thought I had been there working because of the pace I was using thought I was an easy target for blackmail. I was young then. Aren't you still too young to go into a brothel? The fox asked. Well yeah, Naruto said. I'm talking about my past life. The fox blinked at that, but didn't ask any more questions. He knew about reincarnation and figured that's just what the kid was talking about. He'd met a few humans that could access their old memories of past lives. Of course some of them were fake, but he didn't think that Naruto was one of those. Must be because I'm confined in his body, the fox thought. I wonder if I can access those memories? Naruto grinned, knowing what the fox was thinking and also knowing that the creature couldn't access those memories. His past was a future that had never taken place and now that the direction of his life had changed somewhat. He was now on Team 11 with 2 older girls. Both of whom seemed like they'd be pretty decent to him, but it would depend on tomorrow's first official meeting and whether they could work as a team or not. I wonder what kind of test Tokuma-sensei is going to make us do. I doubt that it'd be the bell test, he speculated out loud. He put on his sleepwear and said, I just hope that these girls are willing to work with me. He yawned, put on his animal sleep cap and went to bed. The next day all 3 genin were yawning. They had all arrived 15 minutes before 6 o'clock in the morning. Akiko stifled another yawn and asked, why so early? I don't know, Riza said with a yawn in reply. Maybe to gauge our readiness, Naruto voiced his idea, pleased that he could do so and no one immediately told him to shut up or even ignored his suggestion. We're not ready, Akiko said and Riza nodded. I agree, Tokuma-sensei told them, popping up nearby and surprised them. Well now that you're here you have 3 hours to try and capture me by any means necessary. This is the second phase of your genin qualification exam. Begin now. He disappeared in a puff of jutsu smoke. Damn, Naruto said, we should have trapped the clearing. Now what do we do? Akiko said. Riza sniffed the air and said, I think I know where he's gone. We need to hide ourselves now, Naruto told them. He's probably watching us and laying traps for us. The girls nodded and Riza indicated the direction of their sensei. The three took off in a false direction and they all heard the sigh of despair. They hid in the dense bushes nearby and talked strategy. "We need to prove to him that we're good at what we know," Naruto said. "Did either of you come prepared?" "I have a camo cloth," Akiko said. "It's one of my inventions." "I have sneezing powder," Riza said. "It's made from flower dust and pepper." "Cool," Naruto said. "I have tripwire, kunai and few other things, like a roll of silk cloth." "Perfect," Riza said. "Give me the silk cloth and I'll use it with powder. You take your camo cloth Akiko, since you're familiar with it, and create a trap. Naruto, you get him out of that tree and keep him busy. Jump back when we tell you." "I can do that," Naruto said. He closed his eyes and hissed, "Disperse, now." The girls escaped while he charged at his sensei. He used nearly every trick he had to attack the man and guide him in the direction that he'd been told to. He waited to hear the word from the girls. Now, he heard from one of the girls. He jumped back after his last attack and dodged the unrolling silk that spread the powder along its path. He used kunai with nin wire attached in order to herd their sensei into an area that held the camo cloth on the ground. Their sensei fell into a pit trap that was covered by the strange cloth. Unfortunately, they forgot that he was a Hyuga who had activated his Byakugan. The man avoided the trap with a switching jutsu, but ended up with a face full of the powder and began to sneeze uncontrollably for a few minutes before he tapped the chakra points to close his sense of smell. Riza popped out from where she'd been hiding as soon as he'd done that to attack him. He switched away, but he couldn't hide from the Inuzuka. She guided her teammates to his location every time, and there were a few times that Naruto found him before she did, which meant he guided his teammates to the man's location. The cooperation between all three in dogging their sensei surprised him, and he made an immediate decision to pass them, only if they kept it up for the next hour and a half. The two girls used everything that was taught at the academy and a few taijutsu techniques that weren't, because they used nin wire as jump ropes to confuse him. The boy surprised them all by dropping 2 ankle weights and 2 wrist weights, to attack from the treetops with increased speed. He had the habit of dropping down to catch the man off guard. Eventually all three were attacking using their coordination and combinations that looked like they were thinking of them as they did them. "Time," Tokuma-sensei said. His 3 students collapsed, huffing and puffing because they had exerted themselves in trying to capture the Junin. He grinned at them and said, "You've all passed." "What do you mean?" Akiko asked. "We failed to capture you. You worked as a team the entire time," the man said, releasing the pressure points that he'd sealed for his sense of smell, and sneezed a couple of times. He then said, "You need to think of a better way to release that powder. This test was one to see if you could work together, get coordinated and adjust when things went wrong," Tokuma-sensei said. "Also, none of you gave up, even when the time was dwindling." "Wow," Naruto said. Akiko retrieved her camo cloth. The sensei asked to see it by holding out his hand for the item. "This is unique," he said. "However, because of the Byakugan I was able to see it clear as day." "Is this the only one you have?" Naruto asked. "Do you have a smaller piece of that same material?" "Sure," she said, and handed him a small handkerchief-sized piece, and then watched in horror, as he was about to put ink it. "What are you doing?" "Just a minute," he said. "Tokuma-sensei, can you see the chakra in it?" The Hyuga activated his bloodline limit and said, "Yes." "Keep watching please," Naruto said. He dipped a brush in dark ink and painted a couple of sigils into the 4 corners of the cloth. Tokuma blinked and looked closer. The chakra that emanated from the cloth disappeared. It now looked like a cloth that could disappear into the ground. He's startled by the change. "I can't see it," he said. He took it and tossed it onto the ground over a lost shuriken, where it immediately blended with the dirt and stones, hiding the throwing star. It disappeared from everyone's eyes, and he reconfirmed, "I still can't see it or what it's hiding." Naruto picked up and showed the sigils. "You'll need to stitch these into the 4 corners of your larger cloth to get the chakra hidden from anyone of the Hyuga clan. I don't know if it'll work for someone that has the Sharingan ability, and it's not one that we can test right now." "We can," Tokuma-sensei told them. "I'll set it up for some other day. Now let's talk about strengths, weaknesses and training. Then we'll talk about missions for the 3 of you." A genin team is formed and created in the hopes of teaching the new Ninja Academy graduates how to work as a team. Tokuma-sensei shook his head and nearly despaired as Naruto looked to have assimilated a somewhat female mindset. He watched them giggle and generally enjoy their D-class missions, which to him was kind of strange too. No real ninja enjoyed D-class missions because they mainly felt like demotions to the higher-classed ninja. It was the boy that explained to the girls that higher missions had higher failure rates. Any mission completed at any level or class was a success, and that D-class missions should be deemed holidays or a reaffirmation for those with a higher ninja rank. Why? Riza asked. Think about it, Naruto said, and then kept silent. This was one thing that Team 11 had learned from him. Anytime he said those words, he truly expected them to think about it. He refused to explain anything until they came up with a few reasons of their own, and sometimes it was along the same as his thoughts. Akiko was usually the one to figure it out first, but from time to time their Junin sensei would pipe in with a speculated answer. Tokuma sensei was surprised quite a few times when the answer should have something he'd already known. Not all mission successes, Akiko said. Ninjas take their life into their hands when they accept a mission, and sometimes it's the kind that's do or die. Those with the skills to take such missions, even if they succeed well, some part of it might have left them feeling unsatisfied, Riza said. Like an enemy escaping or a prisoner dying or the loss of a teammate or a friend getting hurt. D-class missions in the village could help the higher-level ninjas to remember what they're fighting for too, Naruto said, as nodded and confirmed that those were his thoughts. It's a fact that those with the more risky missions are more prone to mental instability in the long run, if they don't take breaks. How on earth did you ever think of that? Tokuma-sensei asked. Some book I read said that overworked and overstressed people can become mentally unstable or have breakdowns if they don't find something to distract them from whatever is causing the stress in the first place, Naruto told them. I just reinterpreted that for ninjas, since our jobs as our ranks rise, will become that much more stressful and harder to accomplish. What kind of book? Tokuma-sensei asked, curious about what the boy had taken to reading. Some kind of psychology of the mind thing, Naruto said. I was looking for something else and found one called Everyday Stresses and How to Relieve or Ignore Them. Their sensei shook his head and then said, we've been doing non-stop missions for the past 2 months. The next 4 weeks we will be training and improving your common ninja skills, followed by another 3 weeks of intensive training in specialized skills. So don't expect mission pay for the next 6 weeks, you'll only receive the base genin pay. All 3 genin groaned dramatically, but then broke down into laughter because their groans had been synchronized. Nei sensei, Naruto said. What specialized skills? Well, you've already got them, Tokuma sensei told his team. Riza is into bombs, Akiko into cloth manipulation, and you are our close combat fighter. During the 4 weeks, Tokuma sensei began. The training will be composed of mainly physical training with focus on adding jutsus or learning another form of taijutsu to combine with what you already know. We'll also work on strategy combinations for differing situations. We'll brainstorm together and help the girls improve or work on their specializations. Fresh ideas are what are needed for some of the more advanced missions, if we want to begin accepting them. C-class missions, Naruto gasped and quivered in excitement. Oh, yes please. Why so excited about that? Akiko asked. Some C-class missions are done outside of the village and involve travel, Naruto said, as his eyes showed them how much he wanted to visit some place new. I've never been anywhere other than the outside training grounds and parks areas around Konoha. I haven't traveled further than perhaps 50-100 kilometers away in some radius to the village. Really? Riza asked. That's odd, why not? I'm an orphan, Naruto said to her. Who would I go visit and who would take me along just to go visit someplace new? Oh, Riza replied. Sensei, do you think that Naruto could teach us some of his stretching techniques during those 4 weeks? He's still more flexible than either of us and we want to know why. I can't force him to teach you his secret techniques, Tamika-sensei said with laughter in his voice. I'll admit to being curious about it. What do you say, Naruto? The blonde thought and then said. What'll I get for teaching it? Students, Akiko told him with a smile. Bah, Naruto replied with laughter. Who wants such troublesome students? Well, what would you want then? Akiko asked with a grin and a laugh. Some of your specialized camo cloth, Naruto said. Without the Fujin stitching that I showed you. How much of it? She asked. Enough to make an undersuit and a cloak, Naruto said. I'll expect written instructions to be able to continue training in the exercise when we're done the 4 weeks, Akiko said. Yeah, Riza agreed. Written instructions, depending on whether it's worth it. If it's good I could add it to my future women-only classes. What are you going to pay me? Naruto asked the Inuzuka girl. Bombs, she told him. I'll give you a complete bomb set and instructions on how to make 3 particular ones. It'll be your choice on which ones you want the instructions for. Cool, Naruto said. Then he turned to his sensei and waited to see what the man would offer. Tokuma's sensei should have known. Even being their sensei, his team had always worked on a kind of quid pro quo method, always exchanging knowledge or something of one sort or another. He wouldn't be learning for free. He paused and then said. Ask me for one thing, a favor if you want. I want to buy a good wakizashi blade in Tanto, but can't, Naruto said. I'd also like good Bakken versions of both for practice. Why can't you? Tokuma-sensei asked. The dealers in this town will only sell Bakken weapons to genin, Naruto huffed. Some genin can purchase live weapons, but for some reason they'll only sell me the Bakken weapons, and the ones they'd let me buy are crap. They wouldn't even last after a single hit and are worse than the academy practice weapons. I see, their sensei said, surprised that the weapons dealers would sell his students substandard weapons. I'll see what I can do about them, depending on your instructions, little sensei. Can I talk to you after you dismiss us? Naruto asked his teacher. The mission is finished, Tokuma-sensei said. So you're dismissed until tomorrow. Meet at our regular training ground, 23, normal time, 6 am. The girls took off. They were partly excited about the training and wondered just what more they could specialize in. You have something you want to ask me? The Junin asked. Yeah, Naruto said. If I gave you the money, could you buy me a heavy wakizashi in Tanto Bakken? You do know there's a reason they won't sell me the good stuff. Do you know the reason? His sensei asked, wondering, just like Yuhi Kurenai had months ago, about how much the boy about his birth and the mark that sealed the demon beast within him. Yeah, Naruto told him. Most of the civilians hate me and want me to die on ninja missions to get rid of me. It's why I'm always wearing orange or other bright colors. He shrugged and then explained, I used to practice with the academy's weapons to improve the formations, but I need something closer to the real thing to properly practice with now, especially if I want to use live blade one day. I figured that if we ever got a mission outside of Konoha and in some other city, I'd be able to buy all the live blades I'd need. I see, Tokuma-sensei told him. He'd never thought to ask the boy why he hadn't purchased that many live weapons, and now he had the answer. He sighed and knew that he'd have to find a way to keep him supplied with some of the base necessities. All right, what are the lengths and weights that you want? How are you currently getting your shuriken and kunai? Max length wakizashi Bakken, 60 centimeters, the weight between anything between 12 and 15 pounds, Naruto told him. 3/4 to full size for the Tanto Bakken, but it must weigh between 16 and 20 pounds at least. He was about to give the man the money, but was told to hold off and wait until he could get the items. The small blades like senbon, shuriken and kunai are borrowed from the training grounds. It's not my fault that some get stuck in out of the way places and that most ninja are too lazy to hunt for them. It's better to wait, just in case I can't get them anytime soon, his sensei told him. I'll give you the bill for the Bakken weapons after I'm able to pick the up for you. As for your other blades, good thinking. A ninja must be resourceful, especially when you run low on resources. But what would be your favor for a copy of the instruction set? Tokuma-sensei asked. Buying the Bakkens cannot be deemed a favor if you're going to pay for them yourself. Taijutsu training, Naruto said. I'd like to improve my taijutsu techniques. Maybe help finding a good merchant outside of Konoha for the live blades? Very well, we'll see about that, his sensei said. You're dismissed until tomorrow morning too. Thank you, sensei, Naruto said, running off in the direction of one of the few places he knew he could get a quick meal at a simple price. He planned to hunt for more pocket blades sometime later in the day when most of the genin teams were no longer in the training grounds. Are you kidding me? Akiko said 2 weeks into their sensei's training schedule. They'd watched Naruto go through his morning stretch routine, once without weights and once with weights. You do this every day, several times a day? Why so much? Riza asked. She paused to look at her watch and commented, Nay, Akiko, that didn't take long. Complete. Sensei, Naruto called out to their Junin instructor, who'd been asked to set up a wire trap in the most complicated configuration he knew. The blonde handed the girls each a pair of goggles and told them, flip the lenses to red on the right and blue on the left. Let your eyes adjust and look over at sensei. The girls' eyes adjusted and then they gasped. There was ninja wire in a seemingly impossible, invisible mesh net in front of them. They saw their sensei, with his Byakugan activated, on the other side of the net. He was prepared to collapse it when a line of the wire if it was triggered, like a spider's web. The girls saw their teammate shed his regular orange jumpsuit, ninja sandals, and noted that he was wearing a full bodysuit, including feet. He pulled a hood over to cover his hair, put on a pair of ninja goggles too. They noticed that he had gloves and toed socks on too, which acted like gloves for his feet. Then they watched as he did a few stretches to warm up his muscles for the unconventional moves that he was about to make. His first step was low, and then a sweep of his leg had the girls gasping. He was close to the wires, but never touched them. His moves were slow, graceful, and most times he was stretched to a most extended position, which he held on with only the tips of his fingers and toes. The gloves were anti-slip, and so were the toed socks. He passed many of the wires without skimming any. He was so close that the girls and his sensei couldn't help their gasped or stopped breath reactions while they watched him move through the twisted web. Close to the end, his back arched and twisted to the left. A high jump kick, twisting over to the right, had him avoid the large knot of low wire near the end, but the jump was also calculated to avoid a swinging top wire. A high dive roll cleared the last bit of the net that had nearly been impossible to navigate. Tamika-sensei's jaw dropped when he realized he was facing his student that had never once touched a single wire. "I guess that works," he said, stunned at the level of body discipline that the boy had. "Girls, what do you think?" "It's 'cause he's small," Riza said. "No adult would be able to go through all of that." "She's right," Akiko agreed. "We might, if we had his form and flexibility, but didn't that nin wire mesh take a long time to set up? I don't see any ninja setting that up when on missions in the field." "You're right," Tokuma-sensei told them. He released the chakra anchors on the kunais that held up the wire. Most only set up a few base configurations, and only the ones that have worked for them in the past. "If you gather the wire you can keep it." Naruto immediately pulled at two of the kunais, while the girls raced to do the same from the other side of the mess. Even if the wire was used once, it could still be used a couple more times before it had to be reforged into new wire or melted down for another purpose. He took one of the kunai, planted it in the ground, and spun it like a top. He used chakra to keep it spinning and did the same with the other that pulled. With luck, he'd end up with 2 lengths of wire for practice. He beat the girls to more of the kunai and repeated his process. The girls were surprised and then followed his lead. It was a good idea. He gained 5 rolls wire, while the girls each gained 3. Akiko looked at the bodysuit and had an idea of what he wanted the material for. "If I give enough camo cloth for a bodysuit it won't grow with you," she said. "You'd be stuck making another one." He freed his hair and propped his goggles onto his forehead like he'd used to wear at the academy. His ninja band was around his neck, and that had been his only identifier. "You're right," he said. "I guess you can't make it out of stretch material either." "There's a way to do it," she told him. "But the technique is not perfected yet. Still needs a few application tests first. Then there's field testing and washing tests to do too." "I'll test them for you," Naruto said. "I could do it as long as I have other clothing on hand should they rip at the wrong time." "How about a new jumpsuit, then only not orange?" Riza giggled and could totally picture a bum rip happen during a mission. "Maybe you should start by creating underclothing, Akiko?" Tokuma-sensei let out a chuckle and Naruto said, "Ha. Been there and done that. You go matte gray or matte black. Just forget about tidy whities for a mission. It's better to stick with some kind of bodysuit under regular clothing too." "Depends on the mission," Riza giggled. "Kunoichi might have to use fancy lace, you know." Naruto said. "Not even for my waijutsu." This had everyone laughing because of the time that the girls turned into studs. They knew how to look and act like male eye candy for women. They'd converged on his female form and forced him to put on lacy underwear, including thong-type panties. They'd made him and their sensei act and be girls while they played with the men forms. It was a good thing that they did that a few times, because that's how they discovered the way to alter Naruto's appearance to not be recognizably himself, and then same for their sensei and his Hyuga eyes. It was a lesson well learned, the man told them. At least all of you were credited for creating an effective undercover jutsu. It's unfortunate that it takes quite a bit of chakra unless you dress the part before you change. True, Naruto said. But when you watch a player skit on stage, there has to be some quick change tricks that they use. There must be something of that we could copy. You know, like something that's red becoming dark brown or black or the reverse. Akiko thought about it and then asked, "Do you have extra pen and paper on you?" "Always," Naruto said, and he pulled out a few course sheets to make notes on. He handed her a thick lead pencil instead of pen and ink. "Less mess in the field," he explained to them in answer to their questioning looks. Akiko immediately began to make notes on colors and then said, "List the colors that are adjacent to one another. Maybe it would be better to not make a full camo cloth, but a series of change clothes." "I have a color wheel at home," Naruto said. "But if you line up the primary colors of blue, yellow and red in a triangle, follow it by their combined colors of green, orange and purple above that, and you should understand the base range for most colors." "Yes," she mumbled. "It's just a matter of making them duller or brighter. Learning the opposites or even colors that complement one another. How did you ever learn this?" "Took a watercolor class at the academy with Kurenai-sensei," Naruto confessed. "Even got a recommendation on my file because of it." "Interesting," Tokuma-sensei said. "Once you're finished writing Akiko, Naruto will begin by instructing us on the base moves that you do." "Yes, sensei," the blonde said. "Riza, let's clear a flat area while Akiko finishes her notes." "Sensei," Riza said as she swept the area, removing twigs and branches from the vicinity. "Do you think we could learn to pass through the ninja wire, like Naruto did?" "You could," Tokuma said. "This could be additional training that we'll do in order to increase your list of skills, but it's one of those that requires periodical practice in order to remain flexible. We'll work on mock situational missions, specific to infiltration and trap detection." She nodded and said, "Since we're young, we should do it now in order to have the skills for the missions that'd need us to work like that." "Good idea," Tokuma-sensei said. "We're also going to work on chakra control before we take any more missions." "About time," Naruto said. "If we don't learn chakra control, we won't be able to learn our elemental affinity or work with it." "Quite right," Tokuma-sensei said. "Akiko, you'll have to finish making notes later." "Little sensei," he said to Naruto, indicating that the blonde was to begin the lessons. "Sensei," Riza asked, as they had gathered at a food place, eating a treat paid for by their sensei for the successful completion of their first C-class mission, after their intensive 6-week training period. "Could you please tell us about the Chunin exams and what to expect?" Akiko looked up from the small cardboard square of dango. "Yes," she chirped up. "What was your exam like?" Tokuma hesitated and then told them, "I didn't take a Chunin exam. I received an in-field promotion about 15 years ago." "War, huh," Naruto stated. "Best sink or swim promotional tool of the ninja ranks. I'm guessing this was to increase the number of people they could send out to the front lines, right?" "That's right," Tokuma confirmed. "But you must have attended at least one of the non-war exams," Riza said. "Could you tell us about them, please?" "I may have," the Hyuga-sensei said. "Why do you ask?" "We're working towards that goal," Akiko said. "It'd be nice to have some idea of what's expected of us before we even get nominated." Tokuma looked at the 3 eager faces, sighed and then told them, "The Chunin exams are usually broken down into 3 categories or sections. The first 2 must be passed as a team or cell. The last part is usually a display of abilities or skills in a competitive forum, which is done on an individual basis." "What do the first 2 sections contain?" Riza asked. "Usually the first is a written exam," Tokuma told them. "The contents are always different, as is how to complete it. The second is usually a survival type of test, which includes extensive teamwork in a hostile, often foreign environment. It's also a physical competition against other teams, kind of a winner-take-all, sort of thing." "That's going to be the tough one," Akiko said. "You'll have to decide whether you wish to participate," Tokuma agreed. "But before that you need to at least do a few more C-class missions, which I firmly believe that the 3 of you are ready for. So tomorrow we'll meet at the missions office to negotiate for a couple of those." "Yeah," all 3 genin cheered. Naruto had been on his genin team, Team 11 for approximately a year and a half. Their sensei had deemed them ready to take the winter Chunin exams in Suna country, which was a good thing since their country was under treaty with Konoha. They'd done several C-class missions, some within the village, but 3 were done elsewhere, which gave the blonde Jinchuriki a chance to get his much-wanted live Tanto and Wakizashi weapons. The girls had followed him and ensured that some of his purchases were materials for clothing that Akiko was going to show him how to make on his own, so that the boy wasn't always stuck with bright colors. The team had learned quickly why the boy always wore orange when they had gone team shopping at the local shops in the village. None of the shops offered him anything but orange clothing or bright colors. The girls had been furious and their sensei couldn't convince the shopkeeper that the boy needed to blend into the background in order to properly do his job. "Guys, it's all right," Naruto had told them with a toothy grin. "We're taking C-class missions now and some involve traveling with caravans of traders. Since they don't know me, I could get better fabrics from those merchants at better rates too." It was true. Their first C-class mission had been protecting a small textile merchant and his wares. The blonde had been an avid textile student during the entire mission, learning about the fabrics and about the differences that would and would not be useful to a ninja. He was currently wearing dark brown skin-tight pants at capri length and skin-tight shirt with sleeves to the elbow. He had a sleeveless knee-length jumpsuit in dark greens with patches of dark reds, yellows, orange and brown. This was courtesy of Akiko's fiddling and he was currently testing the outfit with a promise from the girl that she'd supply him with a new one when he outgrew this one. "We wanted to buy a team item," Riza pouted and left the shop. "I know," Naruto said. "Sorry guys, but most don't want my money." "That's not true," Akiko said. "They'd willingly take your money, but will sell you shit instead of what you need." "Language, young lady," Tokuma-sensei said. Akiko pouted and crossed her arms, even if she was 14 now. "Well, what are we going to do?" Riza tugged on one of her ears and then blinked. She looked at her sensei, then Naruto and then Akiko. "Earrings." Akiko looked up, thought about it and grinned. "Oh yes," she said. "We can buy the kits at another store and do it ourselves. My older sister wanted to do mine, but my parents told her I was too young." "How old were you when you wanted them done?" Riza asked. She too was 14 now. "I was 5, Akiko admitted. "This time it's different." Riza nodded her agreement. Naruto, who just recently had his 12th birthday, thought about it because he was a boy, but he'd seen men wearing earrings so he didn't think that it would be that bad. "Never had any team activity like that in my past," he thought. "I wonder what my old class would have thought about that, if I'd gotten them back then." "Naruto," Tokuma-sensei said. "Do you want to do this?" "Do you, sensei?" the blonde boy asked him back. The girls looked at him and he shrugged. "I don't mind as long as it's for both my ears and that you two go buy what I need to get them done." Akiko brightened and so did Riza. "Sensei," she asked the Junin. "What about you, sir, would you join us in this too?" "I'm part of your team aren't I?" Tokuma said with a gentle smile. He'd never had a team include him in this kind of thing either. It was kind of nice to not be forgotten. "Make sure you buy the items needed for aftercare too." "Yes, sensei," the girls said and entered another shop that catered to those kinds of items. They ran in giggling and Naruto just moved away from the store's front so that the merchant wouldn't know that the girls were buying him a pair of earrings. "Does that bother you?" Tokuma-sensei asked his student. "Nah," Naruto said thoughtfully. "I've gotten used to most of the merchants short-changing me or selling my garbage that they wouldn't feed a starving dog. The D-class missions have taught me how to hunt for my own meats and how to cultivate plants and herbs to supplement what I can buy. I'm grateful for that because I don't have to rely on food from the bad ones anymore." "If you become the Hokage, they'll still be people that I'd fight for," Naruto replied honestly. "They'd allow my precious people to live and their services are essential for my precious people, so I'll fight, even for those that don't like me." He grinned and said, "I'm a shinobi of Konoha because I earned this and because I chose this job." He fingered to his hite-8. "You still have a long way to go," Tokuma told him and corrected what he meant. "I mean to become the Hokage." "I know," Naruto said as the girls left the shop. Akiko was eager to get this done and asked, "Where should we do this?" "My place," Riza said. "There are pups that just finished being weaned and I want to show them to you guys. My parents won't mind either." They'd never said a word about Naruto or any of her other teammates whenever she'd mentioned them, so she was sure they'd be fine with her team visiting. "Gaki." The fox called to him several nights later. Naruto said and turned his focus internally. "What is it? What the hell is this?" the fox asked, wiggling a long ear in his direction. Naruto narrowed his eyes and then started laughing. The earrings he'd gotten days before had copied and been implanted into the ears belonging to the demon fox. They were much larger and looked to fit the demon, but the stones were unmistakably similar to the ones in the blonde boy's ears. Ah, ha, ha. He laughed. Got these several days, ago. He pointed to the dark purple studs glinting from his ears. My team each got a pair of the same color and we pierced our ears. He'd done Riza's ears and his sensei had done his. Riza did Akiko's ears and Sakura's cousin did their sensei's. It was a team thing. He then paused dramatically and said, "Welcome to the team." The demon fox huffed and said, "Don't get anything else pierced while I'm still around." Hi. Naruto agreed with a chuckle. That all? What about tattoos? Don't try my patience, kid. I expect to be consulted for any tattoos, just in case there are adverse effects with these seals. There's got to be a way to protect against such reflections. The demon said as he grumbled and twitched both his ears as though he could remove the offending items. Naruto's awareness had only been diverted for a short time. He was currently in the middle of packing his supplies. They were going to Suna on the following day in order to take the Chunin exams. He couldn't wait to get there in order to see Gaara and maybe help the poor boy out a little earlier than he'd done in the past. Let's be honest, I never knew about him until he arrived for the Chunin exams here, he thought, packing some overnight camping equipment. No real need for a tent, but definitely a cover of some kind. Desserts are cold at night too. His weapons care kit was placed in his backpack, along with a cloak. He added a scroll that held a canvas cover, a sleeping bag of down that was made for all types of weather, rope of several lengths and pegs with push buttons that snap an anchor open. In another scroll he had a large wok-like pan, a large pot, 5 bundles of firewood, matches, flint and strikers, in case, and 4 bundles of prepackaged rations that only needed water to boil them into readiness. The final scroll contained most of the clothing he thought he'd need for the trip. He paused and then added his watercolor and drawing items in an additional scroll. This was just in case he had some downtime to make some drawings. He usually did that in every town they visited. The girls and their sensei were used to seeing him with a drawing pad and several pencils in a small over-the-shoulder satchel that tucked easily under one arm when needed to be moved out of the way. Thank Kami for storage scrolls, he thought. There's nothing worse than trying to haul all the gear you need in too many bags. The only problem with storage scrolls was that they were limited by the number of items, item type and sometimes by the chakra strength of the person that activated or created them. The following day Team 11 met at the gates and traveled to Suna with 5 other teams of Konoha Genin. The changes in the countryside were gradual, but they all felt the heat of Suna country when they passed one of the border stations. Wow, Naruto said, it's like a sea of sand. It did indeed look like a sea, even with the wind blowing sand dust and dust clouds over the surface. It even had waves. The others of Konoha that had never visited Suna country were equally awed by the expanse. All right you little shits, the Junin proctor to the Suna exam said to all the genin in the room. Take a number from the box, sit down at that spot and shut up. The process didn't take too long and soon everyone was seated at random locations in the room. Write your name, seat number, team or cell number and the village that you're from at the top of the exam sheet. Put your pencils down and wait for further instructions. The steely-eyed Junin proctor noted that many listened to her and that quite a few did not. A few discreet coughs from their seat companions had them complying, since the exam couldn't begin until everyone paid attention to the large Junin woman at the front of the room. Now, she said in a tone that made most of the genin jump because they'd been startled by it. Team 11 from Konoha and 8 others did not react. Shinobi were not to take note of loud noises unless in direct relation to their active missions. Notes by the examining proctors were marked on the clipboards that they had in their hands. You must pass with your team. 10 questions total overall are shared among your team or cell members. Each question is worth 5 points. Your team needs a minimum of 30 points total to move on to the next phase of the exam. Anyone caught cheating and you'll leave the room, with your team members joining you, immediately to leave in disgrace. Begin now, she bellowed loudly. Again the same teams that took no notice of the volume of her voice were noted. The others had points marked against them in increments that would be used to take away a team's accumulated written exam points. Whereas the teams that never reacted gained points, this included a gain for those that quickly followed the initial instructions. Points were taken off for those that caused a delay in the start of the exam time. Naruto looked at the questions, sighed and answered every question that he believed a genin could answer with a bit of judicious observation of the room. This made it seem like he was looking around for someone to copy from, but in reality he didn't need to. He returned to his paper every once in a while and wrote another answer. He skipped a couple and answered another one that looked like he was following one of the plants in the room. Then he returned to fill out most of the rest and chose to leave what he'd thought were the harder ones alone. His written exam was still a guaranteed 40-pointer for him and his teammates. He hoped that the girls caught on to the information gathering part of this exam. The exam time was 2 exact hours long and 3 teams had already been eliminated because their technique in information gathering was very poor. "Time," the proctor yelled. "Put those pencils down now." One additional team lost points, including the same others that reacted to her initial bellows. It was not Team 11 from Konoha village. They were used to loud noises because of Rize's love of things that explode. At least it's only noise, Naruto thought. If there was anything added to the noise like Rize's pepper bombs, I know that Akiko and I would be out of here. Go into the room across the hall, while we correct these and evaluate your conduct in this room, the proctor said. The room allowed the genin teams to mingle. However, most were too nervous and chose to hang out in their cell formations. Half an hour later another proctor showed up and said, "All right everyone, the following teams go back into the room across the hall. Team 8 Suna, Team 5 Kiri, Team 9 Suna, Team 11 Konoha, Team 6 Konoha, Team 3 Suna, Team." Naruto noted that only 1/3 of the teams that had taken the written portion of the exam came back to that original room. The girls stuck close to him and that made him feel like a protector for them, even though he knew full well that they were very capable in defending their own honor. Besides, they were way taller than him now. It was one of the ploys to make them seem like an easier target and a suggestion that their Junin sensei had advised that they take whenever they travel. This strategy made many people underestimate them. It was still a strategy that made the blonde boy feel 10 feet tall, though. As soon as no other genin team entered the room, the first proctor said, "Congratulations. You guys pass on to the next phase of the exam. You have 2 hours to prepare, meet your sensei and get guided to this year's exam location. It's the buried palace in the desert." Dismissed. Akiko's eyes glittered and Rize was about ready to laugh at nothing in particular. Naruto wanted run fast and far, but instead he left the room with his teammates to seek out their sensei. They needed to make sure that they had the right combination of supplies to succeed the second stage of their exam. Hyuga Tokuma watched with worried eyes for the emergence of his team with the others that had been disqualified. His team plus one other from Konoha seemed to be delayed. A genin from one of 4 other failed teams said, "They passed." Tokuma blinked and thanked them for the information. The 4 teams from Konoha that failed were permitted to stay until the end of the Chunin exams or leave depending on the reports received from the exam results. Their Junin senseis chose to receive the exam results first before making any decision, after which they all elected to leave Suna. It seems that those teams were some of most the disruptive ones and needed quite a bit of remedial training in stealth and information gathering. Tokuma watched an excited blonde come flying out of the building, followed by 2 equally excited young ladies. They all squealed, giggled and jumped for their joy in passing the first phase of the exam. Naruto handed their sensei the map that they were to follow in order to get to their new location. Apparently there was transport that they could opt to take to the place, so he led them to the area with the funniest looking creatures. "They're camels," he told them. They followed the instructions to mount them and then they were off, racing into the desert. The transportation was offered to all visiting genin teams, as this might be the only time that they'd experience such a strange mode of transport. The buried palace looked like it lived up to its name. Once they had arrived they still had an hour to prepare. "Tokuma-sensei," Naruto said. "Can I draw for a bit? Are you ready for the next phase?" the Junin asked. "As much as I can be," Naruto nodded his head. "Very well," Tokuma-sensei told him. He watched as the blonde Jinchuriki sat down in the sand and pulled out the charcoal pencils he'd just picked up locally with the various tan and brown colors of the region. Naruto began to draw the milling animals that they had just ridden to get there. The man had to smile because the image was obviously going to be a good memory for the boy. The girls were happy when Konoha's Team 6 finally arrived because one of their friends was on that team and they wanted to chat about what they thought might be happening for their next phase of their Chunin exam. They also watched fondly as their teammate quickly captured the desert people that had escorted them, the animals and a few of the groups of genin teams milling about the area. He even captured the parts of the building that had been exposed and emerged from the sand in order to be used for this portion of the exam. He drew his team in the front of it. They were mock-posed as though a picture had been taken instead of his imagination drawing it. "Naruto," Tokuma-sensei said. He watched as the boy finished his last quick sketch. "Thank you, sensei," Naruto said. He stood up, put away the drawing pad and pencils and then stretched his arms. He stretched, did a few handstands to unkink his fingers and asked, "Should I remove them?" "Not unless you think you need to," Tokuma said to him about the weights that the blonde was wearing on his wrists and ankles. The proctor in charge of this second phase spoke to the groups. "All right, everyone, listen up. See these forms?" He held up a bundle of papers. "You sign them and then we can go on to the next phase. Basically, it's a form that states we will not be held responsible for idiots getting themselves killed by being stupid in there. Your task is to carry a statuette of either red or black. To successfully finish the exam, your team must have both colors." He paused and then continued, "You fail if even one of your members is unable to finish with you, for any reason. This is the first time we're using the buried palace for a Chunin exam. It's an ancient structure full of ancient traps that will destroy you completely. Your task is to enter one of these 4 entrances." He pointed to 4 darkened entrances that they could all see. "Find a team with the statuette of the color you need and take it from them. There is a pedestal somewhere in the center of the building with places for the 2 of them. You need to place the 2 different colored ones on it to complete the second phase of this Chunin exam. You have 7 days to finish this task." Naruto gripped the tanto handle in the belt of his outfit. He had his wakizashi sword strapped to his back on an angle. The Akiko flexed her hands. Riza placed hers on one of the pouches at her hips, which contained a number of her bombs. They'd signed the papers and were handed the black statuette, which meant that they needed to find a team with a red one and take it from them. They also had to navigate the palace and avoid any old and possibly newly laid traps. Akiko was the one selected to carry the item and had it tucked away in one of the many blank storage scrolls. "When I call your team, you go to one of the entrances until there is a team at each entrance, after which the 4 teams will enter and then we'll call for the next 4 teams until all cells are in the palace," the proctor said. "A word of warning or opportunity for those of you going in there. The Kazagakage of Suna has given all of you blanket permission to take and keep whatever treasure you happen to find during the course of your exam." This announcement elicited frowns from most of the visiting Junin senseis, but the Suna proctor just continued. "However, any of those treasures are likely to hold the deadliest of all traps, but the choice is yours." He looked at some of the genin's excited faces and there were very few that frowned at the prospect of treasure. The most notably frowning genin was the small blonde boy that was surprisingly teamed up with 2 older girls. The proctor shrugged and began to call out the team numbers. Naruto's team was part of the second wave of genin going into the building. He pulled out a blank scroll to make notes and another piece of paper to begin mapping the entrance area. He trusted the girls and followed their chakra using primarily the Gyo technique from Nenjutsu that he was practicing. He wore ninja goggles to hide that ability. "Stop," he said. He looked up and down and then said, "There's dust on the ground. That means that no team has passed before us in this section." "What?" Akiko said. "There were only 4 entrances to the palace." Riza sniffed the air and nodded. "He's right. There's no smell of human sweat or of the eraser that one of the team in front of had used for the written exam." Akiko looked more closely at the walls and then looked back. "Genjutsu or shifting walls? Maybe both," Naruto said. "It'll make mapping useless, but I'll still make notes in case we encounter traps." "Good point," Akiko agreed. "So who leads?" "Naruto," Riza said. "He more quick on his feet plus he's got that technique." "All right," Naruto said, taking point. He headed down the single tunnel and kept an eye out for potential openings. He handed his notepaper and pencil to Akiko to continue them. "We're headed downhill," he told them. Riza placed small 1-inch squared of very lightly scented tags of paper on the walls. She had several in different scents that would allow her to change a scent if they changed direction. They would also let her know if they'd walked around in a circle. 4 days later they had their second statuette and had fought 3 teams, only one had what they needed. Now they had to get to the center of the structure before the 7th day. They were close because it was only one floor above them. On their fifth day they found a large treasure room. They had a very spirited debate about whether to take anything. Naruto was against it because the dead and items of the dead should remain sealed. But Naruto, Akiko said. The case cage had given us permission to do this. Think of what we could learn. That's what scares me, the boy told them. Some things should never be exposed. Yeah, but, Riza started, and when they were both paying attention to her, she continued. Other teams will pass through here and take the treasure. All I see is an altar, Naruto said. The pots look empty and the walls are creepy. There are holes where the eyes should be in the wall carvings. We'll step where you step, Akiko said. We'll stop when you tell us. That's a lot of responsibility, Naruto said. There's an opening of fresh air near the altar area, though, Riza said with her nose in the air. We can't even really go back now either, because the walls shifted again. Sure enough, that path that they'd taken to get to this room was no longer there. They had no choice but to go through the large room. Naruto sighed and could see how this wouldn't turn out well for them. He chewed on his lip and then said, "All right, but you two rest a bit while I have a look around." He activated his Nen Jutsu and cycled through the meditative techniques to center his inner core. Ren, he breathed in. Ten, he breathed out. Gyo, he opened his eyes and focused everywhere he could. The Gyo Jutsu revealed auras from only 4 of the many pots that were lined up along the walls and something on the top or in the altar. There are 4 pots that we could store away, Naruto said and pointed them out. Look at the floor, there are hidden spring traps, which may or may not activate. I'll get them, Riza said. She crouched down and activated a partial Inuzuka technique that allowed her to crawl on all 4s and increased her sense of smell. Put them in these, Akiko said and handed her 4 small storage scrolls. They've never been used and this way we can each have a treasure, plus give one to sensei. The Inuzuka girl nodded and very slowly made her way around to the pots their companion had indicated. She successfully collected all 4 and was about to make her way back. No, Naruto said. Stay where you are. Akiko, look up. The Haruno girl did and gasped. Spikes were slowly lowering. The removal of that last pot had triggered a trap. Shit, she said. Riza, try and get to the altar, but take your time. Naruto? Walk on the walls, Naruto said. He pulled out a harness and had her put it on. He tied a carabiner to himself and roped the 2 of them together. If you slip, you know what to do. Don't worry, I'll hold you, but keep moving. I suspect darts, likely poisoned ones, are in the walls. Okay, Akiko said, let's do this. Riza? There are spikes coming up from the floor now, the Inuzuka girl said, as she sidestepped to avoid one coming up. Drop your 4-footed jutsu and walk the walls, Naruto said. He chose to walk on the wall with the most holes because if anything came out from the opposite wall it was likely to miss them. You're closest to the supposed exit. See if there is something to stop the traps near the altar. 10 minutes later Akiko slipped and that's when they sped their movements. Now, he said as he ran and jumped, avoiding more spikes coming from the walls this times. Not poison darts at least. Akiko kept up and Riza was already at the altar area. She was transfixed by something on it though. Suddenly she pushed a hidden button and all spikes retracted. Oh my god, you guys hurry up, she cried. I pressed the wrong one and there's a gas leaking into the room. Naruto cut the rope and dropped Akiko to the floor. He dropped down next to her and said, we can run from here. They ran to the altar. A blinding flash appeared from its top. Countdown to Rune's destruction continued, a mechanical voice said. 5. Riza was through the slowly closing door. 4. Naruto hauled Akiko through the door. The girl crashed into Riza, who grabbed a hold of her friend. They both shouted, Naruto. The blonde Jinchuriki pressed 3 buttons on the altar. 3. A hidden compartment opened. 2. He grabbed the item inside, stored inside a scroll and slid under the stone door before it fully closed. 1. The muffled voice said. This way, Naruto said and grabbed both the girl's arms to get them up and out of the way of the explosion that was coming. Go, quickly. The area rocked from the muffled sound behind the door. Keep going, he told them, as he tucked storage scroll away in a pouch. The walls cracked and that indicated to the girls that they had to run no matter what. The cracks were racing them and suddenly there were more cracks in front of them. Shit, Akiko said. She found a passage that split in 2 and turned into 1, but it was the wrong way. Ah, Akiko. Riza screamed and grabbed the girl's hand and arm. Naruto skidded up behind her and helped her to pull their teammate out that room. As soon as they pulled her out, they noticed that she was missing one of her feet. Her right leg bled from her ankle. What happened? Something bit it, Akiko said. Or it was cut by an old trap. I couldn't see into the room and I forgot to sense for traps with my chakra. I'm getting woozy. She passed out. Naruto pulled the cut climbing rope from his belt and bound Akiko's ankle in a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. He then bound the whole thing with white clean silk and then he tossed the remainder of the silk roll to Riza. He hauled Akiko onto his back and secured her there. Riza, he said to the crying girl. We're done, let us out. But the exam, Riza said. We'll have another chance at another time. We can't finish it now, he said. We need to get the both of you to a medical center first. What are you talking about? The Inuzuka said. Riza, Naruto said in a patient tone. He took the silk roll from her right hand and wrapped up the other hand, quickly and efficiently. He bound injured arm to her chest. Let's go, he said. Lead us out of here. Yes, she said. Aren't you injured? Not that badly, Naruto said. We can't waste time, keep moving. I don't think that we're too far now. They turned around the corner and there was the pedestal for the statues. That's how close they had been to finishing the second phase of the Chunin exam without injury. I'll put the statuettes on the pedestal, she said and took them from the scroll that Akiko had stored them in. As soon as they were in place, a proctor appeared from the puff of ninja smoke. He took one look at all three and said, hold on to this. He held out a length of wood. We'll get to the medical center. We'll also inform your sensei where you are. What's his or her name? Hyuga Tokuma from Konoha, Riza said. Thank you. The Junin nodded and didn't bother to let them know that they failed. It was evident by the bandages on one girl's hand and on the other girl's foot. Haruno Akiko's foot had been fully severed and technically amputated in the buried palace. She was going to be in rehabilitation for a long while and would probably never be able to continue the path of the kunoichi. At least she'd already planned her retirement, so to speak, and had prospective customers already lined up. She wasn't bitter because it had been her decision to take that path. Inuzuka Riza's hand had been deeply burnt. Rehabilitation was part of her long-term future too. However, she did plan to continue her kunoichi training. She knew would never go past the rank Chunin. She still wanted to open facility for women to go train without any male presence. There might be one exception. That is if he used Waijutsu and went there to teach. Uzumaki Naruto visited the girls as they did their rehabilitation, but Team 11 was officially disbanded for the time being and another set of 3 genin will inherit that team or cell number. The 12-year-old, blonde boy needed to be recycled into a new team. It was felt that he'd able to aid his new Junin sensei in training 2 newly promoted genin, rather than being made to fit into an older team. Will you be all right? Riza asked. Of course, Naruto said. As long as I'm not placed with the Uchiha or Akiko's cousin Sakura. Those two would probably be the worst combination to mix with me. So true, Akiko said from her bed in Suna's medical center. Team 11 were saying their goodbyes to the girl now that her parents were here to oversee her transportation back to Konoha. You still have to buy your clothes from me. That's a promise, Naruto said, along with Riza. His attention was split when he felt the presence of another Jinchuriki just outside of the room. I'll let the two of you say goodbye. We'll see when you get back to Konoha. Thanks for everything, Naruto, Akiko said. Come by any time to bitch and moan about your teammates. I'll do that. He stepped outside of the room and closed the door. He watched a red-headed youth walk away. He scaled the walls, ran along them, caught up to the one that was Shukaku's container and dropped down in front of him. Hey, he said. Who are you? This was the first time that any visiting ninja had asked for his name. Gaara, the Suna genin replied. Why do you ask? Just making sure, Naruto said. He leaned in and whispered, I can help with that. He pointed to the shifting sands that were the cause of the redhead's sleeplessness. How do you know? Gaara said. What is your name? I'm like you, Naruto said. Uzumaki Naruto. A weapon, Gaara said with a nod. No, Naruto said. A protector, for my village. Gaara blinked at that. The sand at his feet moved as though it wanted to attack, but hesitated. Then the youngest son of the Kazekage stated, you failed to become Chunin. True, Naruto said with a good-natured grin. But the future's not written in stone. I'll have other chances. I can still help you with that, if you want me to. No, Gaara said. Perhaps, in the future. That's a guarantee, Naruto said and watched the sand lift up to try and attack him. He let out invisible heat in a stabbing motion that stopped the sand. Gaara looked surprised, as Naruto's friendly expression never changed, but he'd shrugged at the curiosity shown. Told you, he'd said, and then he watched the confused red-headed boy and future Kazekage continued on his way. Tokuma and Riza were waiting for Naruto at the entrance of Suna's medical center. Let's go home, Tokuma-sensei said to the last two members of Team 11. You two will have to write a report about what happened in the buried palace and perhaps try to explain why the Kazekage is not happy about it collapsing. Naruto's eyes twinkled and he winked at Riza, who giggled, and that caused him to chuckle, as they used chakra in their legs to speed up their travel time to home to Konoha. Naruto was in the missions office receiving his new official orders, after having to take a month's leave. It had to be taken in order to monitor his health and deem him fit for duty, despite the fact that nothing had happened to him in the buried palace like it had for his two teammates. The Hokage had wanted to speak to him specifically too, and so the blonde boy had to wait for several long minutes, until he was called into the office. Hello Naruto, the third Hokage said in greeting. Your mission report from Suna was interesting. Tell me, did you manage to bring back treasure? No sir, Naruto said in complete honesty. He hadn't taken the time to look into the storage scrolls that were used to remove the 4 pots or at the secreted device that even the girls of his old team didn't know about. So technically none of them knew if they'd removed treasure or not. The old man chuckled and then said, a council decision has been made and you to be placed with 2 genin from the new batch coming out from the academy this spring. Your mission is to try and ensure that they pass the secondary stage of the exam. You're also to aid the Junin sensei with their instruction, but only when asked to do so. Naruto eyes narrowed. So, who's the sensei and what team? The old man handed him a scroll that contained some insight to his new teammates, which included base information on his new sensei too. Team 7 reports to the academy for their placement in 5 days, Sarutobi told him. This will give enough time to what you need to do. Understood, sir, Naruto said and pocketed the scroll. The extra time was his to with as he pleased. It was then that their meeting was interrupted by a disturbance outside of the room, and then suddenly a long scarf-wearing kid with a missing front tooth appeared and screamed at the old man. The boy tripped and fell flat on his face in front of the old man's desk. Wah, the boy cried. He pointed at Naruto, who only lifted an eyebrow as the kid complained. You did it, you attacked me. You tripped over your own scarf because it was impractically long, the blonde said. You have no personal awareness, so you're just an idiot child. Ebisu, the boy's ninja tutor, had followed the kid in and said, Honorable grandson, do not listen to this person. He's beneath your notice. Naruto snorted. He watched as the kid actually tried to attack the old man in the presence of a stranger. He shook his head, grabbed the end of the scarf and pulled the kid away from the old man. The kid fell in a tumbled heap at his feet. Kid, the blonde said. You don't attack a cage like that. You need more training, subtlety, and you're totally exposed. The shinobi arts aren't to be used that way. I don't know who are you, but you don't have any right to tell me what to do, the kid replied. He walked up to Naruto and tried to kick him. The blonde moved too quickly for the kid to see and swept the boy's legs out from under him. It had made the boy fall onto his back, winding him. See this? Naruto pointed to the Hite 8 around his neck. I earned this. This also means that I'm a ninja of this village. You are only citizen. Attacking the Hokage, no matter what his relationship is to you. He paused and glared at the ninja that stood gaping from the doorway. Means that you're supposed to get subjected to intensive interrogation, torture and possibly jail time. That is, if you've lived through the torture. Of course that might also depend on how far you got when you attacked the cage. So what'll be kid? Ebisu's jaw dropped even further from its primary position. How dare you address the Hokage's honorable grandson that way? He's being groomed to become a future Hokage and you're nothing of consequence, you're just. Ebisu, the Hokage warned. The kid scowled as he listened to the exchange. There it is, he thought. Someone else who'll treat me special and only because I'm the Hokage's grandson. Naruto smirked and then smacked the boy hard on his noggin with a closed fist and digging in his point. I don't care about that, the blonde said. The law states? Ah, Naruto, Sarutobi said. It's all right. I'd still recommend jail time for the brat, Naruto shrugged, crossed his arms, and then he said, "Oh well, since I've 5 days until I meet the new team, permission to leave the village for supplemental training on the plateau then." "Granted," the old man said. He filled out one of the many forms on his desk that he kept for such situations. "Here you go." Sarutobi handed him the signed and stamped paper. "Only for 4 days, I'm afraid. It's been booked by another team after that." Naruto saw an added notation at the bottom, quirked an eyebrow and received a nodded permission from the old man. He bowed and left room. As he passed the ninja, Ebisu, who was supposedly the boy's primary instructor, he kicked the man in the ass. This sent the supposedly elite ninja flying into room with such speed that he crashed face first into the wall. "HMPH," the blonde boy muttered and shook his head as he left. "You're not much of anything either, pretentious, snooty." And the rest, of what Genin Uzumaki said, couldn't be heard by those in the room anymore. Sarutobi, the third Hokage, watched the elite tutor grumble from his position. His grandson's eyes sparkled and he ran away to catch up to the one ninja that had been able to take out his boring tutor. Not only that, but that blonde boy was the first one to ever strike him and tell him about the dangers of attacking his grandfather. Naruto casually walked down the street making a few mental notes of what he needed in order to conduct his private training. He knew that he'd need some extra equipment if that notation were to come into effect. He shrugged and thought, "I've just gotten written permission to corrupt the kid if he follows me. This never happened in the past. I wonder how the tutor will be occupied during the time frame, if the kid escapes the village." The blonde hopped from rooftop to rooftop to quickly pack his camping gear. He ensured that he had enough food rations and just the base equipment. 4 days should be enough time to remove some of the stars from the kid's eyes, he thought. He needs to see the hard work firsthand in order to learn to take his time and just be a kid. I know he's got friends to hang out with. Naruto secured his apartment with a few traps. He ensured that most his live weapons were safely stored at Akiko's place because he didn't trust most people in the village to leave his belongings alone. I know that I'm the Yondaimi's son, he thought. There has to be some clan property that I can access. I guess they still need me to remain ignorant though. He hopped out of his apartment window, after having packed most of his fresher foodstuffs into a scroll that had a built-in section that kept cold things cold. He'd never told anyone about that in the past. It was one of those fuinjutsu techniques with the element of snow mixed in. No one knew he had that elemental affinity, but then again that was one of the stolen cage's elements from his past battle with his last enemy. He dropped to the street and kicked a completely square box configured to look like stone. The box exploded in a loud puff of colored smoke. It was the same kid that had tried to attack the Hokage in the old man's office. "Look kid," Naruto said. "That was a poor form to use to hide and too easily detected. You'll have to do better than that to fool me." He turned and walked away. The boy then chose to zip into a shadow, which the blonde noticed. The technique was sort of okay, but that kid's scarf revealed his position every single time. Naruto ignored the boy until he reached the gate guards and handed them the note. The Chunin looked at it wide-eyed. The blonde glanced in the direction of his shadow and the guards just shrugged. They made a notation in their records and handed the permission slip back to the genin. Then Chunin then made an obvious show of being distracted when a garbage can exploded nearby, even though they knew who did it. The long scarf-wearing shadow thought he'd succeeded in passing them by and tried to follow the blonde genin, who was on a path towards a plateau found on the mountain's cliffside behind the Hokage monument. Naruto ensured that the boy was exhausted from trying to keep up, before he stopped, turned back and looked down at the huffing kid. "Well, what should I do now?" he said. "I could return you to the village and forget that I'd earned the right to train in peace. Take you with me and make you train hard to pay back for my loss of private time, or I can call the guards that followed you and get them to take you back." "Take me with you," the kid said. "I'll do whatever you say. Please treat me like a ninja. I am ninja or I'm gonna the best ninja, you'll see." "Very well," Naruto said. "I hate wasting my time getting somewhere with someone not yet trained to keep up." He shifted his backpack to the front, picked up the kid and placed him at his back in a piggyback position. "You hang on," the blonde said. "'Cause we're gonna fly." The kid, who'd yet to introduce himself to the genin, closed his eyes as he felt the body under him spring up and hop quickly from tree branch to tree branch with a speed he didn't know could be learned while young. They reached the rock face in record time and now it was just a matter of climbing it. "By the way, my name's Konohamaru," the kid told him, as he'd been led down from the back of the person that had carried him far from the entrance of Konoha village. Naruto, the blonde replied. He pulled out a long length of coiled rope and placed it on the ground. Follow my lead and stretch your limbs like I do. When we're done that, we need to take a piss in the woods to clear our bladders. The boy watched and tried to follow some of the stretches, but didn't quite understand why. They returned from the toilet break and the kid asked, "Why'd we have to go?" "So that we don't piss ourselves because it takes too long to climb the rock face. Normally I'd just whip it out and piss out in the open, but you're going to be traveling below me, so I don't think you'd like it if I pissed on your head, now would you?" "Gross," Konohamaru stated and covered his head from the imagery he could see in his mind's eye. Then he watched as the genin picked up the coil of rope and began to approach him. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "You're not a pervert or something." "Nope," Naruto replied. "I need to make you a rope harness so that you can climb the rock with me, now stand still." He wrapped the rope in such a way that the boy felt like he'd been placed into a real harness that went around both his legs, around his waist and over his shoulders. A large carabiner was clipped to the X formation of rope on the boy's back. "You step where I step," the genin told him, as he tied the other part of the rope to himself. He also handed him a pair of bare paw, gloves. These were modified for the spikes or claws to be in the palm of the gloves rather than the usually bare claws that ninja used. These will help you to learn how to climb using your fingers, but will also help you catch the rock face when you can't find a finger hold. "Let's go." "What if I fall?" Konohamaru asked, knowing it was way too late to back away from this adventure. "The rope will hold," Naruto said. "I'm going to continue climbing, but you climb as much as you can until your limbs feel like noodles. I'm going to do an evaluation on your skills. Climb for as long as you can. When you can't, you let me know so that I can prepare myself to haul you up, understood?" The boy developed a stubborn look in his eyes. "You need to tell me as a warning for when I'm going to be carrying extra weight because my path going up will have to change," the genin explained. The look didn't leave the boy's eyes, so he bopped him on the head with his fist. "It's not a matter of pride, you little idiot, it's a matter of survival. You followed me and said you'll do anything. I'm telling you to let me know when you can no longer hang on, understood?" "Yes, boss," the kid rubbed his head and sniffed. He looked back longingly in the direction of the village, but it was way too late. He was out of familiar territory with someone who was practically a stranger to him. Naruto just nodded and began his climb. The kid observed and then began the slow crawl up the cliffside of the mountain. He'd done a bit of wall climbing with his tutor, but nothing of that had prepared him for this. He climbed as far as he could and still climbed some more from sheer stubbornness. He noted that the leader always paused to wait for him when the rope distance lengthened and started to tighten. His toes hurt, his fingers were sore, and he'd nearly pissed himself a couple times when he'd slipped from what he believed to be a secure foothold. He gave in when they'd passed the halfway mark about 30 minutes ago. "Boss," he called up. "Naruto, I don't think that I can hold on to anything anymore." "Grab the rope," the genin called down. "Shift your position so that your feet are flat on the cliff. When I pull on it, you walk up slowly hand over hand, letting the rope get slack until you're close to me. Then you'll stop and rest, while I climb, and we'll continue until we reach the top. Understood?" "Yes, boss," the kid replied. "Why didn't we begin with that?" he thought, and then realized. "He taught me. He actually taught me too." His thoughts broke as he felt the tug on the rope to indicate that he was to walk up, almost like a reverse situation from rappelling. He neared the blonde and noted the sweat the genin had from the climb. The kid was ashamed that he butted into the ninja's independent training time. He'd have gotten up a lot faster if I wasn't around. "Don't worry about it," Naruto said as the boy neared him again. "Having someone else around is training for me too." The kid looked up and noted the serious look on the prankster's face. "I have to join a new team of graduated genin. They won't know even half the things that my old team knew, so I'll have to show them how to do things like this too. Remember, I chose to let you come and you chose to follow me. Now let's continue the climb and get to our camping area before the sun sets. If we're lucky, we can even take a dip in the pond before going to sleep." "There's a pond up there?" Konohamaru asked in excitement, eager to shed his sweaty clothing. "A waterfall too," Naruto said as he began to climb again. "It's good for a quick shower, but you need to remember that the pond is shallow, so no diving, understood?" "Yes, boss," the kid replied with a formal salute. He waited and watched the genin climb. Just by watching he learned how the older youth did it, using a kunai as a piton anchor. Periodically the blonde dusted his hands in the dirt, and that's how the kid found a natural way to remove the sweat from his palms. Naruto looked into the campfire and then to the boy that had curled up in one of the blonde's larger old t-shirts and inside an old smaller sleeping bag that the genin still had. He'd brought along a few of his old clothes and gear because that kid was totally unprepared to camp out in the open. There was a large canvas tarp, strung between two trees with rope and pegged in a way that gave it the upside-down V tent form. He'd had the kid gather twigs, dry grass and long branches, while he looked for a good-sized downed tree to chop up for firewood, after he'd set up the base tent. Konohamaru had been subjected to another piggyback ride in order to get to the campsite. It was only after they'd reached the approximate camping area that the rope harness had been removed. They did stretches to remove any kinks that had developed during the course of their climb. The kid watched as the genin pulled out a scroll that held some of the gear that was needed for camping. That first night they ate dry and tin rations only. They bathed quickly in the pool and the kid was grateful that extra clothing had been brought along for him. They dug their toilet trench and found a piss stump before the kid slumped quickly into sleep in an old, but surprisingly comfy sleeping bag, as the genin fixed to the fire burned smokeless and yet still provide the heat needed for the night. They were in an elevated location, which was naturally colder than the village. Naruto snorted as he heard the kid mumble with a whiny tone, "Boss, don't piss on my head." The genin shook his head and then pulled out his mission scroll with the background information on his new teammates. He'd read a few lines about the sensei and noted that he'd been given far more information than he'd ever had the first time around about one Hitaki Kakashi. The scroll had an explanation related to the formation of the team and most of the reasons for teaming three dissimilar mindsets under a Junin known to be lax regarding many issues. Team 7, Hitaki Kakashi. Known by several names, most common, Copycat Nin, or Mirror Ninja of Konoha. Retired rank of Anbu. Active rank Junin. Son of the White Fang of Konoha. Hitaki Sakumo, who committed suicide when his son was young and newly promoted to Chunin, Received an implanted Sharingan eye, left, belonging to Comrade Uchiha Obito during a mission to Rock Country. Comrade Kia, chronically tardy, knows many valuable jutsus. Uchiha Sasuke. Chakra levels mid to high, requires refinement, potential future Sharingan wielder, potential fire element affinity based on family history, skilled in several forms of hand-to-hand arts, mixes a few together, strong in using leg katas, mid-range and close-range fighter, weapon specialization, not known, low book learned skills, never took any optional courses, personal belief that he's elite among his peers, affects social interaction with said peers. Only survivor of clan massacre from the hands of older brother, Uchiha Itachi, who is currently a rogue ninja and in the bingo book lists. Haruno Sakura. Chakra levels low and requires refinement, high book learned skills, low hand-to-hand skills, weapon specialization, not known, fighting range, unknown, potentially genjutsu specialist, never took any optional courses, entering puberty for females, easily distracted due emotional phase. Unknown potential for other ninja skills. Unknown interest for other ninja skills. Naruto snorted, as some of his own stats were included in the mission scroll. Uzumaki Naruto. Very high chakra levels, refinement ongoing. High probability for elemental affinity, use and jutsu creation. Low book learned skills. Skilled in several forms of taijutsu and other hand-to-hand combat. Range of attacks, situational, mostly close combat fighter. Exhibits elements of unknown jutsu type not yet recorded. Naruto blinked at that line and then thought about the Chunin exam he'd taken in Suna. The girls must have mentioned the words I'd said when we were in that treasure room. Damn, I'm going to have to be careful about that. No wonder the old fart asked about treasure from Suna. He paused and then looked up at the sloth monkey hanging from the tree above that had been watching over them ever since they'd arrived. There was a smaller, more agile spider monkey curled on the belly of the hanging sloth. Old man's got his summons out. He noted. He waved at them and then continued to read. Jutsu type not yet recorded. Weapon specialization in Wakizashi blade and Tanto blade. Self-taught. Recommend Kenjutsu training. Self-taught gymnastic forms. Skilled in watercolor and calligraphy. Recommendation on file by Yuhi Kurenai, potential Fuinjutsu skills, suspected, but not yet apparent. Well, that's quite a bit about me, Naruto muttered out loud, and then the next paragraph was all about the council's reasons to form the team. Team 7 created to pair Uchiha Sasuke for tutelage under only other known Sharingan user in Konoha. Genin Uzumaki is experienced in working with a Haruno family member, to assist in the training of Haruno Sakura when Junin begins to instruct Sharingan student in more advanced skills. Instruction or training of Genin Haruno by Genin Uzumaki and only to be acted upon, when requested to do so by Junin sensei. Genin Uzumaki must try and ensure successful pass for Team 7 in hidden secondary Genin exam. The Genin huffed, sighed, and when assured that he'd read every mission parameter on the scroll, he tossed into the fire to get rid of it. It was evidence that he didn't need to keep it, just in case curious fingers found their way into his pack. Kakashi-sensei had been known to pull unprotected scrolls from unsuspecting packs as training against thieves. That's what he'd done in the past. I wonder what he'd think about my sticky fingers lifting his precious Icha books, he chuckled. He made sure that no part of the mission scroll remained. He checked his traps and then crawled into the tent in the other sleeping bag next to the Hokage's grandson to sleep for a good portion of the night. He had a timed trap set to release a soft bang to wake him up early in the morning for his first set of morning exercises. Bang, bang, bang. Wah! Konohamaru woke up from a deep sleep, startled by the sound of the time-released explosion tag that was set close to the tent, to wake up the kid. What's going on? Morning, Naruto said cheerfully. It's time to get up. We have a lot to do and only 3 days to do it. What are you talking about? The kid said with a scowl. Put your shoes on, the Genin said. There's a path that we're going to run on and you have to finish at least one circuit before we eat breakfast. Stretches first. Naruto stretched and had the boy do the same. Follow the red tags on the trees, the blonde told the kid. The Genin paused as he ran in place to make sure that the boy was going to follow him. He paced the kid until he said, I plan to run the circuit several times, so I will be passing you and testing you to see how long it takes you to do one lap. Understood? Yes, boss, the kid said loudly, as though the louder he was the clearer he sounded. He noticed the blonde just jogging next to him, until the Genin picked up his pace and forced the kid to run at a slightly faster speed. You stay at this speed until I catch up to you, Naruto said, and then took off quite fast. Konohamaru watched at how quickly the older boy disappeared, but the path was well tagged, so he did his best. He was winded and exhausted by the time he was 3/4 of the way along the path. By this time his boss had passed him 9 times and was due to show up one more time. Hey kid, Naruto said, jogging up to him, and slowed down to match the boy's pace. You've only 1/4 of the path left to go. How? Huh? How long? The kid asked, curious about how long they'd been running. Runnin'? Naruto looked to the sky and said, about an hour and 15 minutes, why? Curious, the kid said. Never, ran that, long before. That's expected, Naruto told him. Save your breath for the last leg. We're going to slow it down a bit now. He paced the boy, and soon nearing the end of the path they were walking normally back towards their camp. The Genin made the boy do more stretches and then they had to fish for their breakfast. What? Konohamaru complained. Why fish? I didn't bring enough dried goods, Naruto said, as he handed the kid a pole with a line hook with a wriggling worm attached. Dried and tin goods are easy to store and should only be used in an emergency. When traveling, a ninja must make use of the environment or of local stock and resources available. Since you want to be treated like a ninja, that's what we're doing. Oh man, the kid looked at the pole and pouted. You catch nothing, you eat nothing, Naruto said, and left the boy to his thoughts. He sat down on a rock and proceeded to fish. He was aware of when the boy had made his decision because the kid had joined him. Soon they were both sitting cross-legged. They bopped the fishing line up and down to tease the fish into biting, and eventually they had caught several kinds, 2 of which were thrown back. We can't eat those ones, the Genin explained. He moved away and handed the boy a kunai. The kid just stared at it and then realized that the blonde was going to make him do everything. Do what I do and watch your fingers, Naruto told him. He showed the boy how to clean the fish for eating. He showed him the thin green sticks that he'd already prepared. He explained where they came from and why they were called green sticks. They threaded the fish and cooked all of them after getting the fire going once more. He explained a bit about camp cooking and then said, "We'll hunt for root vegetables, herbs and berries this afternoon. If we get enough to last us for a few days, then we'll only need to fish for the rest of our time here." The kid just followed him around. "What about water?" the boy asked. "We'll need some to drink. See that barrel?" Naruto pointed to a half-barrel that he'd filled with clear waterfall water. It had a lid to prevent stuff from getting into it, and there was a scoop for drinking, hanging from the side. "There's good water in there." He handed the boy an older canteen and said, "Use this while we're in the bushes." The rest of their time there, Naruto pushed the kid to the limits of the boy's small body. He made the kid run that path once in the morning and once before night, while he ran 10 laps around the boy. Push-ups, sit-ups, squats, lunges were done in a repetitious format. The kid had to do 20 of each, while Naruto did hundreds. Konohamaru was subjected to base taijutsu training, climbing the trees and rocks to get to the top of the waterfall, the hard way and not with chakra. They did stretches that Naruto had invented based on yoga and tai chi, base tumbling and cartwheels. The genin made sure that the boy had time to ask his questions and get the answers about why to do things and how come, what for, how long, etc. Packing up the camp on the last day was quick, efficient, and the kid watched how Naruto used storage scrolls for most items. "Did it take a long time to buy your equipment?" Konohamaru asked with curiosity. "Are missions cool?" "It took a long time for me to buy most of my stuff," Naruto stated. "That's because I'm an orphan, so no one was going to pay for me. There's a base pay for genin, which begins at 2,000 ryo. You get that on when you pass all of the genin exams. Then there's mission pay that can be added to that, once your sensei feels that your team can start missions. As for missions being cool, well, that depends on the mission." "Oh," Konohamaru said, slightly deflated. "To be a ninja of any village is to be the visible and hidden soldier of that village," Naruto continued, as he packed the last of the camp items away. They walked to the ledge where they needed to climb down. He pointed to a stump with holes in it and said, "Bathroom." The kid nodded, and once they were both done, the genin once again made a climbing harness of rope for the boy. D-class missions are just as important as A-class missions, the genin continued their conversation. "The way we're going to go down will be easier. You'll rappel down to the max length of the rope, jam this." He attached a kunai to a smaller length of rope at the boy's waist. "Into a crack in front of you, and then I will climb down to meet you. Understood?" "Yes, boss," the kid said and gulped. He watched Naruto go over the edge and then brace himself before he guided the kid to begin his descent. D-class missions are usually missions to help people in the village. The genin continued his conversation. The boy was down and had wedged his anchor with a signal up to the blonde. The villagers know that genin are mostly children, but most ninjas are used for war, so the D-class missions are to let the civilians know that the genin are not only being used for war. "What kinds of things are considered D-class?" Konohamaru eventually asked, after they'd traveled several hundred feet. "Dog walking, weeding, rock clearing, painting fences, painting houses, babysitting." Naruto told him. "You know those kinds of things that usually take a long time to do, but you don't want to do it and you're willing to pay someone else to do it. The worst is finding that damn cat." "What cat?" Konohamaru asked. "The Fire Lord's wife has a cat named Tora. It is about the most vicious thing you'd ever seen," Naruto told him. "But somehow I feel sorry for it because it's always running away from her." "Why would it do that?" the kid said with a sigh, because he could see that they were getting close to the bottom. "The Fire Lord's wife is too attentive to the cat," Naruto said. "Cats aren't like dogs. They don't like to be cuddled, petted or picked up all that often unless they tell you that they want you to do that." They arrived at the bottom of the rock cliff safely. The rope harness was removed, and since it was still morning, the genin made them run and chose alternate longer path back to the village. He chose the longer route so that the boy would be exhausted by the time they returned in the afternoon. "Let's go, we're going to run at your pace." Konohamaru started. He was slow in the beginning, but then picked up the pace until he was in his comfort zone from when ran the red-tagged route. He'd actually managed to run around the path once at a faster pace than normal, and he'd almost been able to keep up with Naruto's second slowest pace. He'd been proud of that. Hours later, the Chunin guards chuckled as the blonde genin arrived at the gates carrying the Hokage's sleeping grandson on his back. They made their notations in their books and waved him on in. One of them had to be a smart ass and say, "You know that he's drooling, don't you?" "Has been for the past 15 minutes, Naruto commented. "You want him?" The Chunin held up his hands and said, "No way. That Ebisu guy has been here every day and nearly every hour since you left. Take that kid home yourself." "Chicken," Naruto told them good-naturedly. He hopped to the rooftops, scaled the Hokage's building and knocked on the office belonging to the old man. "Come in," Sarutobi said. He smiled when he saw who it was and held out his hands to lift the sleeping boy from the back of one of his favorite genin. "Did it go well?" "You already know how it went," Naruto said and pointed to the spider monkey that climbed in through the window. The old man shrugged. "I could write you a mission report," the blonde continued, grinning cheekily. "Go on with you," the old cradled his sleeping grandson. "You have a meeting to keep the day after next." Hi, the blonde agreed, and then with another grin he leapt for the window and hopped away from the tower. At an hour when most of the village was sleeping, a figure in a totally matte gray bodysuit and a strange cloak climbed the Hokage's tower for one purpose. The future is a past story that had never been told, but some events were still predictable. He'd kept an eye on Mizuki-sensei ever since he'd graduated from that man's class. Therefore was never surprised when he detected movement throughout the tower from his sensei using 1-inch square tracking futas that he'd posted in obscure corners of the Hokage's building, the few times he'd been there. The futa or sutras only activated a seeing eye when that white blonde-haired man's chakra passed it. It was, in a sense, a third eye that Naruto used. It linked two of the same mark or design together and opened to look at the person or object with the same chakra. He had to have a copy of that mark somewhere on his body in order to be able to see through the other papers posted. That's how he tracked that man's progress through the tower. He'd been waiting for the spy to take action, and it looked like the man was ready to steal the scroll of sealing. Naruto had managed to get there before the ninja spy. He'd been able to set up a couple of traps and tripwires that were obvious and couple that were not. Now let's see how skilled he truly is, the blonde thought, from his concealed position behind the very effective camo cloth cloak that he'd made with the help of his old teammate. Good thing that this was finally finished in time for this event, he thought as he watched through goggled eyes how a supposedly Chunin-level ninja came into the Hokage's office, disarmed the obvious traps and detected the not-so-obvious ones. The blonde's eyes narrowed and he knew that he'd have to do something quick to capture that man in the act. He had a camera in hand, and with the highest flash level he quickly pulled it out. Luckily it was the type that the photos were produced immediately and that he just needed to pull them from the machine quickly. Several photos were taken. The man yelled his surprise and shock, which alerted the Anbu guards in the area. The pictures showed the area that the man had been aiming for and which files or scrolls he'd planned to get. Naruto produced several Kage, Shadow, Bushin clones, and had them hold the man until he could be taken into custody. He'd even managed to slip in and hit the man a few times before leaving him a broken mass on the floor of the office. The Hokage stepped into the room and noted the number photos that littered the floor and then looked at the ninja being picked up by the arms by his security Anbu. "Well," the old man said in a very serious tone, "it seems that this man needs to meet with our T&I unit for a thorough debriefing." "How?" Mizuki said. "No one knew I was coming." The old man looked in the corner of the room and nodded. "You can come out now," the old man said. "Your training has improved." "Thank you, Gigi," Naruto said and pulled the goggles off along with the hood and hair cover. "Thank you for giving me permission to test my Ifuda." The genin clarified and had a disturbing-looking eye in the middle of his forehead, but it was his actual presence that shocked his one-time sensei. He pulled the paper off his head and the eye on it closed. "They barely work, but I will improve them with time." The old man held out his hand and looked at the paper. "I'll need a full report from you regarding tonight's activities. You may just get mission pay for this," he said. "About that cloak? A gift from one of my old teammates," Naruto said. "Brilliant with textile materials, but unfortunately it takes quite a bit of chakra to keep the effect active." He stopped the chakra flow and the invisible camo feature disappeared to reveal a plain patchwork cloak of multiple colors. "Interesting," the old man said. "Genin Uzumaki, you are dismissed." Naruto bowed and moved to leave the room by the door, as was proper. "Do you know why the whole town hates you?" Mizuki called out in panicked desperation to the boy. "Get me free and I'll tell you." Naruto walked over to the man and looked down. The guards lifted him up in a way that hurt the man's arms. Trying to buy a way out, traitor. Spy. The genin said and blinked slowly, showing the slit eyes of the fox with purple eyes slowly bleeding to red. He gave a very toothy, fanged grin and said, I already know about the fox, now you go have fun with the interrogation unit. Naruto, the old man sighed. The blonde looked back at the Hokage. The fox impression completely cleared from his features and said, it's all right. I figured it out a while ago. If you ever want to know more, the old man offered. Thank you, the blonde said, suddenly choked up by the idea that the Hokage would actually tell him something. I'd like to know more about my mother and father if you please. Maybe over tea sometime in the future? The old man smiled and nodded. You have a meeting that you can't miss in the morning. I'll expect that report as soon as you can write it. Yes sir, Naruto said. He saluted and left the room with a final kick to Mizuki's groin area, causing the traitor to pass out. The old man sighed and said, take him to Morino Ibiki and his team. Find out what he was here for and why. The guards dragged the body of the fainted Chunin, as the Hokage picked up a couple of the pictures that had been scattered over the floor. How did Naruto know about this, he thought. It's a good thing that he was here, though. But testing Fuda? He looked down at the drawing on the paper and wondered just what that little bit of paper could do to improve how teams infiltrated or learned information. That's all for now. If you enjoyed, then please like, share and do comments.